until the Oakdale Police Fire. So, I put in a good spin on that one.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Is that comic or is that your doodles?
Does that look like 6 o'clock?
It's cute. No, it's supposed to be slow dated tonight. It is, it's really good.
Right.
What's going to happen in
So
June?
we'll consider the 23rd, the day after that, or another date if we need to.
Damn, this is the show tonight. Yeah. Taking his last little break.
Sunday paper. I was reading it in the news.
I think we'll be done by 9.
I think we're good. Everybody ready?
Presentations. It's all about brand. She's here for the Red Cross tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Yountville Town Council meeting for February 21st, 2012. I officially call this meeting to order, and we will begin with roll call, please.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Moeller.
Here.
Councilmember Dorenbecker.
Here.
Vice Mayor Tilton.
Here.
Mayor Dunbar.
Here. If you'd all please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, Bob. I keep running into you.
Well, now we'll move on to adoption of tonight's agenda. Are there any changes, or is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda, as stated.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. Now we'll move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to speak on any item that's not part of tonight's agenda. So if there's an item you'd like to bring up that's not here, please do so now. Doesn't look like we have anything, so we'll move right on to item 6, our consent calendar, and I am going to ask that we pull item 6B. I have a conflict with one of the two dates that are proposed for our budget work session, so I'll ask to pull that. Are there any other concerns about the consent calendar, or is there a motion to act?
Move to approve the consent calendar,
Except for item 6B?
except for item 6B. Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So let's discuss 6B. The dates that have been proposed by staff are May 8th and May 22nd. I have a conflict with the May 22nd date due to my Napa Fair Board of Directors meeting at the exact same time. I was going to propose May 23rd, which is the next day, a Wednesday, if that works for council and staff.
I have to get back to you.
That works for me.
Hold on.
Can I just validate?
Is that okay with staff, do we think? And we're not confident yet about council.
That's probably fine.
What I would ask is we at least change it to that 23rd, and then if we do have an additional conflict, we can address that. Is there a motion to that effect?
23rd is good.
So
It's the 8th and the 23rd.
May 8th and May 23rd from 1:30 to 5. I'll go ahead and make that motion since I'm causing the trouble, that we propose our budget work session dates for May 8th and May 22nd here at, the 23rd, just checking. 1:30 to 5 here at the Town Council Chambers.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for making that accommodation. We are going to move on to item 7, presentations. And the first presentation we will receive from the Allied Council of the Veterans Home of California at Yountville. And I believe we have the former and the new chairman of the Allied Council, Ed Olson. Welcome.
Thank you, John, and glad to be here. And greetings to the council and all the members and guests that are here. I'd like to sort of give the state of the home. I would say it's in very good shape as far as the members are concerned, and I think as far as staff is concerned, we have a lot of positive things going on at the home. There's some tearing up of some streets to do some sewer work, but that's always in the, the plan somehow or other, not too cumbersome. I'd like to mention that, yes, we do have new officers and incumbents that are myself and our Jane Boot, who is our delegate at large. Delegate at large, Jane Boot, who also was ran uncontested, as did Ed Warren in the vice chair spot. So now we have Ed Warren, we have Ed Wilson also. Now our new saying is, 2 Eds are better than 1. And hopefully that will be true. Ed and I have worked together for quite some time, and we've enjoyed working together and working on all our problems. He's pretty dynamic, as you probably know. He's probably been almost singularly responsible for setting in a motion to allow us to pass the SB 10 bill that gave us more privileges to deal with the legislators. That's a big step in the right direction. And I think Marcella has basically supported us through this whole thing. We support her, she supports us, and we're doing lots of good things. We plan on, there's lots of plans, like I think we were planning on, or are planning on adding some outdoor activities outside the Member Service Center, but there's some things that have to be dealt with, like historical corridors that have to be cleared, and Marcella has to get this cleared before we can move ahead with the plans, but I think this is going to happen. The fish pond has slowed down, but we're going to take that back and work on it ourselves, because we do have substantial funds in the MWR fund, and so we are very fortunate. The federal and the state government are in really deep trouble financially. The Veterans Home, as far as the members, we're in pretty good shape. So we're very lucky, very pleased, very fortunate to be in such a situation. So we are going to be doing lots of things, lots of plans, and as they come along, we will keep you posted what's going on. Anybody have any questions that I could answer at this point?
Any questions?
We're doing a great job, and you guys are doing a great job, and we continually want to be closer involved and work with you folks in any way we can. So we had a great play we put on. You probably heard about that. 48 of our members were in this. We did 28 songs, lasted 2 hours, and what we want to do, maybe later on when everybody's recovered, come down and do the same thing at the community center down here. Now, wouldn't that be fun? So kick that idea around.
Person to talk to is sitting right next to you.
Yeah. Well, we will definitely talk it up and see if we can do something like that. I think it would be fun. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Ed, coming on a regular basis to give us these reports so that we can continue to share information.
Glad to do that, and we'll make sure that somebody's here. Like I said, 2 heads are better than 1.
That's right. And I do want to just follow up from what Ed was saying, since we may have some additional members of the Veterans Home tuned in right now, wherever they might be. April 1st, there's going to be the Welcome Home for the Vietnam Veterans of America. The ceremony will be here at the Community Center, Yountville Community Center. There'll be a lot more information about that moving forward, but I did want to just mention that. Last year, the city of Napa was gracious enough to host that down at their Memorial Park, but we will be hosting it up here in Yountville this year. So with that, we are also very honored and privileged to have Commander Marcella McCormick, the administrator of the Veterans Home, here to provide an administrative update. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. This is nice. I got to come more often. I like this. I'm just going to give you a general update of the home. As Ed has said, we are actually in great shape. Our census is running at 98%. We are from 99 to 94% in every level of care. We have a real commitment to filling the beds and giving every veteran we can find a home. So we continually move them in. Memory Care Center, which is our most dear level of care, we only have 1 bed open there, but we'll find another person to put that in there. We make sure that we've got people ready for that and for skilled care. So we're running at 98%. Our budget is on target, which is also a concern for everybody. Halfway through the year, we had spent 46% of our budget, 46.3 to be exact, but we pay overtime in the rears, so that would be something we would collect on the end. And we also have to collect revenues at the Veterans Home, and our revenues are running at 47.3% halfway through the year, so we're on target with both revenues and expenditures. The Morale, Welfare, and Recreation is a separate budget. We are running at 41.3% expenditures and 58% of revenue, so we track all of those and we graph them and chart them. Just Steve and I have the same kind of job, so we do that. I think our most visible projects to you are the number of public works projects that we've been doing. We are doing a wastewater renovation project, and many of our roads are going to be closed, parts of buildings. We have 6 different spots where we will be doing that. There we have a great contractor. He is not anticipating shutting down any of our buildings, taking water or sewer away from any of the members. We know that with the population we have, that's very important. So we've done that also. Some of the spots are where our road is a little rough, and he's going to have to dig up, and then voila, we'll get a new road right on top of that. So we're happy to pick out some spots that need both a road and a sewer replacement. We also have a number of projects that we're still working on. We're still working to get the bowling center completed and the cafe and tavern off. We'll work with DGS on those. We have a fire alarm system that's going to go to some of our residential buildings to the right as you come up the driveway. Never had individual to the rooms alarms, and we thought that was a safety issue. So we received matching funding from the VA and funding from the state for a $3 million project in which each one of those rooms will have an individual fire alarm. So when it goes to the fire department, it'll say room 220 in this building on this floor. Right now it gives us a general area, so we were able to substantiate that we need that. Partial funding from the state, and the rest of the funding, 65%, comes from the VA. We also had to repair an emergency steam leak when it went down to 19 degrees. We had a water leak and we had a steam leak. We fixed both of those. We've retrofitted our boilers in our steam plant to meet the requirements for the Bay Area Bay Area air quality in there, not water, air quality. So we will be in compliance with that. And then we did some installation we had some extra money after we finished the drains over at Rector Reservoir, so we went and we decided we did valves now. So we're continually updating. We had, for the project, we had set aside for Rector drains and core valves, we had set aside $200,000, and it came in at $150,000. So they've let us take the rest of the money and do some additional work on Rector to make sure that the water supply is equally as good as it should be. So we're happy to know that we overestimated and got us a surprise and some extra money, and we're going to continue to work on Rector since we share both the water and the sewer in the town in those areas. So. And that's about all that I have, unless there's some questions.
Are there any specific questions? I know one of the things that several of us hear most about is the tavern and the bowling alley. And
Yes.
so that's an ongoing struggle, I guess.
Yes, we are working with the Department of General Services, and they are asking lots of questions. I guess with bowling, there aren't a whole lot of newly constructed bowling centers in the United States. It's not one of the fast-moving kinds of sports. So their engineer has had a lot of specific different questions about bowling equipment and the installation of bowling equipment. We did 2 small projects in which we removed the bowling equipment, so all the old bowling equipment came out, and we dug the trench. The bowling center, when it was originally opened, was manual ball return. And when it opened in 58, 59. And then somewhere in the mid-60s, they went in and did a automatic ball return, but it was above the floor ball return, which is not the way that bowling is done now. It's a below the floor return. So we've dug the trench. We're ready for the equipment. We removed all of the old equipment in there, and so we're simply waiting for DGS to process the purchase of the new equipment, which will go right into the center. So there's no more prep work that needs to be done in the bowling center there.
Great. Are there any other specific questions or comments?
Thank you.
No. Hopefully, we can talk you into coming maybe on a quarterly basis to
That would be just
give us
great.
updates.
All right,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. Okay, now we're going to move on to a presentation of a proclamation acknowledging March as American Red Cross Month. And I know we have two representatives representing the board of the Red Cross, Steve Rosensky and Cindy Saucerman. So if you could both join me at the podium, I'll come down and present this proclamation.
It's Fat Tuesday. She's ready. She's ready.
How many times have you been at this end of the podium?
Not too many.
This is a proclamation declaring March as American Red Cross Month. Whereas each March, before TJ comes out here, whereas each March the American Red Cross and its local community chapters are formally recognized for their essential humanitarian role in the cities and counties they serve, and whereas every day Napa County Red Cross volunteers and employees provide essential services in our community to help those affected by everyone from house or apartment fires to floods, earthquakes, and other natural and human-caused disasters, thanks to the generous people throughout Napa County and the chapter's only source of financial support. And whereas for more than 95 years, the citizens of all the cities and the town in Napa County have relied on the Red Cross to provide disaster relief, as well as training and life-saving skills and disaster response processes and procedures. And whereas over the past year, the Napa County Red Cross Disaster Action Team, volunteers who are on call 24/7, 365 days a year, responded to 9 local residential fires and helped 19 displaced people with emergency food, clothing, and a warm, dry bed to sleep in. And whereas over the past year, 3,870 individuals learned life-saving and safety skills, including first aid, CPR, AED training, and swimming and lifeguarding through 484 classes offered by the chapter. And whereas the Operation Military Support Committee of the Napa chapter has established a networking group of organizations and involved citizens for the purpose of ensuring that our veterans and military families are aware of and receive the benefits and support they are entitled to from federal, state, and local resources. And whereas the OMS committee also collected, sorted, and distributed over 1,500 holiday cards to the Veterans Home and residents at the Pathway Home. And whereas the Napa chapter offers a nursing assistant certification program at the Veterans Home in Yountville using the American Red Cross curriculum, providing an opportunity for qualified participants to work in a rewarding career. And whereas the chapter conducted 37 disaster education presentations for the community to help attendees learn to prepare to make their families and neighborhoods safer. And whereas Red Cross volunteers contributed 9,456 hours of service to the chapter, serving as members of the board of directors, chapter committees, instructors teaching life-saving skills, office helpers, fundraising support, DAT responders to large and small disasters, and more. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, John F. Dunbar, Mayor of the Town of Yountville, do hereby proclaim March 2012 as American Red Cross Month. Especially during this extraordinary time for our country, we encourage all citizens to support the Napa County chapter of the American Red Cross and its noble humanitarian mission. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
It sounds like you've all been very busy. Share a few words.
I would like to thank Mayor Dunbar and all the council members for your proclamation honoring the Napa County Red Cross. And I think people are mostly familiar with our response to fires and disasters and some of the other things we do. I just wanted to take 1 minute and talk about the CNA program we run over at the Veterans Home. I think that's an important thing to mention. That's certified nursing assistant. And why it's important is I believe it's a 13-week program, and we graduate 13 individuals, just about every, or 12 individuals every 13 weeks. And these people enter this program and are almost 100% guaranteed of securing employment when they're finished with the program. From what I've seen, and I review a number of their applications for scholarship funds for the program, so I get a little bit familiar with some of the people. Just about all of them need employment. So this program is important because we are helping these people find gainful employment where they then enter back into the workforce and help the area they live in, the city, the county, the state, and this is more than just a response to a disaster. This is an everyday benefit that the Red Cross is providing for the county of Napa, and I just wanted to mention that. And certainly within this room, even if you know of people that might want to become a certified nursing assistant, this is a wonderful program over at the Veterans Home, and we encourage all applicants to come and get a certified nursing assistant degree. Thank you.
And could you explain what the best way for anyone interested would be to contact you?
Yeah, I'll give you that information, John. I just wanted to let the council know. Thank you, first of all, for this recognition. I got involved with the Red Cross a couple of years ago. The chamber executives were asked to evaluate nominations for their Heroes Awards that they do every year, and this is the third year, entering into the third year, so I'll continue to participate in that program. It is a very well-respected organization. I've always supported the Red Cross as an individual, and now I'm happy to say and very proud to say that I am the Yountville representative on the board of directors for the Napa County chapter. For more information, and we do rely heavily on volunteer services, so for more information about any of the programs that we mentioned to you tonight, you can contact our local chapter at have my glasses. NapaCountyRedCross.org, or you can call them at 257. Is that 2900? That's right. 2900. So thank you very much.
Thank you both very much for being here, Cindy and Steve. Next up, we're going to hear from our own Yountville Arts Committee. So I welcome, I'm not sure which or if both are going to present, but Rob Winterberg and Rhonda Scheer are here tonight. Welcome. Oh, Rob, I didn't see Rob in the back. Hello, Rob Englund. Just like two Robs are better than one?
Yeah. But we say two Robs don't make a right, so.
That's why we have Rhonda here and Kim.
A little different.
Welcome.
Well, for all the Francophiles out there, laissez le bon temps rouler for Mardi Gras. So happy Mardi Gras, everybody. We just want to do kind of a quick year-end review. The Arts Committee has been running this year, so why don't we just quickly go through. I'm going to try to be like the firefighters and just quick and concise. So what's next? We're going to start with the gallery at the community center. We had 5 installation/art receptions. We kind of had one we started with was the children's, which carried over from December of the previous year, so it was still up at the beginning of the year. In March, we had the Open Studios artists come and have their stuff hung in the gallery. In June, we had Art, Food, and Wine. We had Edmund Ian Grant, Jim Stallings, and Don Judah. August, we had the photography show. October, we had the Autumn Invitational, which we brought some plein air artists, that kind of style into town. And in December, we did the ever-famous emerging artists show. So we had some of our locals present for that. So also, if anybody's been in there, I actually am going to plead that I have not been in the front door of the community center in a long time. We have new signage actually above where Stacy's sat that says that it's an art gallery. So it's great. It looks fantastic. So I hear.
It does.
Okay. It looks fantastic. Just trust me. So that's the community center gallery. We've got a bunch more coming this year. One that we're really excited about is we're going to do a father-son show, which we have two artists, that's a father and son, and they have completely different styles, and so they're going to paint the same subject, but in their different styles, and then we're going to put those around the gallery. So it's going to be really interesting and different. We have a lot of other things we're hoping to do at the end of the year, veteran-specific, so I'll get all the veteran artists down from the VA home, so hopefully we'll have that as well. Okay, on to special events for the year. It's hard to believe that Bacchus was actually this year. It feels so long ago. But in February, we did the Bacchus event up at the Lincoln Theater, which was fantastic. Jan Schrem did his whole presentation on art and wine. In March, we did the Open Studios artists came as part of the Taste of Yountville. We all are trying to forget that particular Taste of Yountville. This time it's going to be much sunnier and much nicer. But they were there for that for the first year, and it's actually very successful. In April, we did Arts in April. We actually did a show and sale at Hurley's out on his kind of patio in the back, which was really interesting and fun and a little different. In July, we did a dedication party for Chaos Pamplona. So that was that, all the hubbub around that. We had beautiful event, music, wine, food out for the Chaos Pamplona event. Also, in July, we did the Mystery Writers Reception panel discussion, which was also a hit, and we're actually looking forward to doing it again this year. So that's going to be fantastic. We're really hoping that a lot of these events will we're just in the beginning phases now, but we hope that they'll keep rolling over from year to year to year. So next to the Art Walk, another big one. Actually, can you go back one? I put it down further, but I'll mention. In the lower right-hand corner here, this is Jim Stallings, and he painted during one of the practices of rehearsals for the Russian National Orchestra. And he painted this piece down at the bottom and donated it to the art committee, and we put it up for auction, and so we auctioned that off, and it helped with our funding. So it was a fantastic event. People loved it. The painting, we actually did the auction where it toured around to several of the tasting rooms in town, and so it was presented in their tasting rooms, and all the wineries loved it, and we even actually extended the period of time so it could continue to go around and be in. So that was a really fun, different kind of auction. So on to the Art Walk. Chaos Pamplona, obviously. On the Art Walk in July, we actually installed two different artists. We did Richard Starks, which are the first two in the middle. We did those two pieces. We've actually done a third piece now that's right by Bouchon Bakery and Petit Logis. I'm actually terrified every time I go by and I see some new crane or backhoe like right next to it, but so far they've done really good and they haven't touched it. So that was Richard Stark's piece. They're at Hotel Luca and V Marketplace. The one on the left's Hotel Luca, right's V Marketplace. The one at the V Marketplace, they all have names like CT13 and so. But I really like the one on the right. If you go by and look at it, you can actually see a reflection in this shiny ball. So it's kind of fun to see people looking at that. July, again, was when Chaos was delivered. In September, Don Moore's piece was installed in the Yountville Park, which is the one on the right here. So that was a lot of fun. We got a lot of local involvement in that, getting it.
He's in the back.
Oh, he's hiding in the back. I didn't see him. So that was put in. In November, we installed the other piece, the other Richard Stark I was talking about, or it was the end of the year. Where am I next? Oh, yeah, go to the next slide. So this is the art calendar. We started as a fundraiser. We created a calendar with some of the local photographers. I've talked about it here before. This is just to give you a look at what it looks like. We also created our first art walk brochure and published it at the beginning of the year. We've done a couple permutations of that, thanks to Sam, and now we're even trying to update it some more, which will be great. We did the calendar. We've also started much more outreach to other community art groups at the county level. We've been trying to work more with the local Napa Valley Museum. We've got a couple things coming online. So we've been really trying to do as much as we are locals for local art. We're also trying to work well with other people in the area. Future shows, I told you about the father-son. We have a couple pieces that haven't been signed yet, but we're pretty sure about, that we're excited. We'll be going where Reflections was, at the Villaggio location. We're going to have a new location that's where the old bus stop used to be, at the trolley stop. Is that what we call it?
In front of the coffee
Whistle Stop.
caboose?
Yeah, in
Whistle
front of the
Stop.
coffee caboose. There's kind of a weird big open area where there used to be a bus stop, and it's no longer there, so we're going to use that for some public art. So those are some two new pieces that are, I'd say for sure, we just haven't had the sign on the dotted line, and then a bunch more are in process. Silver Twist will be rotating out. We're excited about that. We'll have some new art going in there. So I know some people are happy that it's leaving. Some people aren't happy that it's leaving. But it's going to be changing to something else new and exciting. So we're looking forward to that here in the near future, next month or so. We've got new pads. We actually presented them in front of the Parks and Recreations Commission, Parks and Community Service Commission. We're going to put 4 more pads in for sure, 2 in the Veterans Home, 1 on a pathway, which I'm not even going to try to describe where exactly it is, because everybody thinks it's somewhere else when I try to describe it. But it's on Veterans Park, sorry.
Memorial Park.
Veterans
Memorial Park as opposed to the Veterans Home, yeah.
Yes, Veterans Memorial Park on California and Washington.
Town property as opposed
On
to
town
state property, yes.
And there's going to be another one, like across the street on Washington, where the vineyards next to Villaggio are. It's kind of along that walkway there. And then another one's going to go in what I affectionately call the rock pile, which is right on Humboldt in Washington, where all the construction has been for all the underground gas lines and stuff like that. So we're going to put one piece in there, too. So that's what we've got planned and in the works. Another thing we've been talking about is working on town colors. It's an idea that we've kind of started. Specifically, Richard Hall suggested we do this. But it's been it's just been a discussion that came up, and we've been kind of batting it around, and we're really looking forward to getting a lot of community involvement with this project. We don't know exactly what town colors should be, but it might be a fun thing for everybody out there to get involved in what your ideas are. So we're excited about that. We're going to do a whole event along with that about the Yountville's true colors and things like that. So it should be fun. Talked about the end of the year veterans show, the mystery writers we're going to do again in July. And then I'm actually going to leave off here with letting Rhonda come up and speak a little bit about some other stuff coming up.
Thank you, Rob.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. I'm here this evening to personally invite you to our 2 upcoming events. You may know about the Napa Valley Photographic Society show and sale. I brought invitations this evening for each of you. It kicks off this Friday with the artist reception. We've got, of course, food, wine, and music. We have about 25 members of the Napa Valley Photographic Society that will be on hand to show you their pieces, a multitude of pieces. They're having a 2-part silent auction, which is a great way to pick up a great piece at a reasonable price. Actually, all of their prices are pretty reasonable. We have the People's Choice Award that will continue through the entire 3-day event. So we're looking forward to seeing you all, thanking you for your support personally. Again, this Friday evening, 5 to 8, Saturday is 10 to 5, and Sunday is 11 to 4. So hope to see you there. Also, we're really proud of what is becoming an ongoing relationship with the Napa Valley Open Studios artists. This year, we're hosting our second annual March show. It's we have an 8-week Gallery at Community Center show, which starts the week of Taste of Yountville. The artist reception is Friday, March 23rd. It kicks off the Taste of Yountville event, of course. And again, food, wine, a great opportunity to see 36 this year, which is increased from last year. Multimedia artists. During their September event, we chase all over the valley, hoping to see and get to maybe 1 or 2 studios. This is an opportunity to see 36 of them under one roof in our great community center. So I have those invitations also for you. Hope to see you there. And I'd also like to pass these around to everybody here. Everything is open to the public, and we hope you all come.
Great, thanks very much, Rhonda.
And so are there any questions?
Any questions? Vice Mayor?
Rob, you addressed my one question that I was thinking about somewhat, which was Silver Twist. I know at any moment it will disappear from Yountville. Do you all have a piece of art that is selected for that spot, or is that in progress?
I'd say we're working on it.
Will
But it's in process. With luck, it'll be right around the same time as Silver Twist goes away. If not, it will be within weeks after that.
Okay. Gordon Huther again, or not necessarily?
It's in process.
Thank you. Thank you for thank you for not answering my questions.
There are a couple pieces that thankfully we have to choose from, and so that selection process is happening.
Understood.
Anybody else?
No, I think
Just have a comment, and that is congratulations. What a great amount of work you all have done, and thank you. Appreciate it.
And I also want to thank the other Rob who has joined us tonight, and also Nancy Gates. And yes, does that remind you
Sorry,
of something,
that was
Rob?
actually why Nancy Gates isn't here is because she's kind of our chair of our literary committee, and they're doing their book club tonight. So they're actually doing that, so she wasn't able to come. So, sorry.
But thanks to all of you and Kimberly Cook, members of the steering committee, and then all the volunteers that help add to that. I know Angie Johnson has been very active as well, and even helping the town with the Yountville Arts website. So we're trying to make it more interactive and inviting, and really get those that whole long and impressive list of events and activities on there for everybody to enjoy. So thank you all very much.
More to come this year.
Great. Thank you. We're going to move on. Item 8 is public hearings. We have none. So I'll move right on to administrative and regular items. The first one being our recycled water project, a presentation of the draft recycled water rates for the state mandated recycled water project. We'll begin with the staff report, please. Graham.
Good evening, Mayor Dunbar, Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and talking about our recycled water project, which is moving forward. I wanted to make some introductions tonight as well. Don Moore, as you know, is our utility operations supervisor, runs the treatment plant. Ted Witten is here from what was Windsor and Kelly, now GHD. He's our project manager. Their subconsultant is Doug Dove and Kat Sang from Barter Wells and Associates, and you may recognize them from when they did the water and wastewater. So just wanted to do a little introduction on their presentation.
So that's Don Moore wastewater treatment plant and local artists that we're talking about.
That's right.
When he finds the time.
So this is tonight. I want to talk about the recycled water rates. The program essentially has been around since 1977. The town was required to put in a recycled water pipeline across the Napa Valley, across the Napa River, over to what was a golf course at Chimney Rock at the time. Bob, next slide. And so the recycled water system essentially is to, at that time, was to dispose of the wastewater because the Regional Water Quality Control Board would not let us discharge the water into the Napa River during the dry months when there wasn't a lot of flow in the river. The recycled water expenses are included in the wastewater budget, so when the town council adopted the new sewer rates, that was part of those costs. And our annual operating budgets also include not just the collection system, the treatment, but also the recycled water system. The costs are shared among also not just the wastewater customers, but the Veterans Home, because they are a 50-50 partner in the operations of the wastewater treatment plant and capital projects. In 2011-12, in our budget, we only collected about $30,000 of revenue from our recycled water customers, which is far less than what the actual cost to build the system and operate the system and do maintenance and staff and stuff like that. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. The regional board is requiring the town to expand the recycled water system, which is to essentially bring on new customers with new pipelines for storage, so that less water is going to the Napa River. The advantage is that it's also providing water to, for example, our current customers like Chimney Rock, Clodoval, and Stag's Leap. This is almost their only source of water because when they go to drill wells, they don't have water. The other customers, which will look, this is if you were up in a hot air balloon over the Veterans Home looking east, off to the left, upper left, is the Rector Reservoir, which is where we get our water. That comes across Yountville Crossroad, Fennell Road, through town up to, through the town, and then the water is used, you might say, and then pumped up to the Veterans Home. The water from the Veteran Home drains to the treatment plant, which is in the middle of the golf course, which I'll show here. So here's the treatment plant and the ponds. And some of that water, once it's treated, is put into the pond at the golf course and then is sprayed onto the golf course for irrigation. They're a good customer because they always need water to water their lawns. The other recycled water is taken across, passed through the vineyards, across the river. Here's a pond here at Mondavi. That's one customer. The water then goes in a pipeline up to Silverado Trail and then up to Chimney Rock. There's a large pond at Clodoval and then Stag's Leap. So this is about 5 miles of pipeline. It's been in the ground for 35 years. We hope it lasts 80 years. But that's essentially our system as it is now. And what we're trying to do is expand the system. And as the pipeline goes through the vineyards, we want to add new storage ponds and create pipelines and connect these ponds to the existing system so that we have more people to take that water and hopefully purchase the water at a fair price. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bartle Wells and Associates to start talking about the study they prepared, the background they've done, the research and some comparisons and some costs for different alternatives. So with that, Doug.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's always good to be in Yountville. So I think you know Bartle Wells from our prior work. We specialize in water and wastewater rates and financing.
It might need to turn on. Check the bottom. I don't know if it's on. Check, turn it over.
Turn it on. Oh.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh, of course.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Now we're in business. So you've got a wastewater system that produces highly treated effluent that can be used as a wonderful resource for irrigating crops and golf courses and other types of plants. And so our study is to look at continuing to serve existing customers. You've got a wonderful a base to work from of relationships in working with the wineries and also the Veterans Home, the golf course, but also expanding your distribution of recycled water to new customers. And we want to encourage the purchase of recycled water in the wintertime. Pretty much in the summertime, the recycled water is all spoken for. It's a precious commodity. In the wintertime, we have more than we can use on the irrigation of crops. So we're looking at using more of the recycled water We also want to develop a pricing structure or rate structure that is fair to customers and also produces revenue for the town. And we want to provide consistency. Right now you have a number of different contracts with different wineries, and we want to kind of make them a little bit more standardized so that it's a little simpler to administer from the city standpoint. You have been increasing your use of recycled water. It varies from about 40% per year being reused up to over 80%. And there's a lot of factors why in certain years you use less and certain years you use more. But in general, the trend is upward, and we're reusing more of the recycled resource. Your customers, right now you've got the Vintners Golf Club, which is not charged because that's part of the Veterans Home. You've got Chimney Rock Winery, which is the original first customer, Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, and Clos-du-Val Ragushki Vineyards. And you can see these customers all pay the same charge per acre foot, but they have different meter charges. And they also have different months where their rates are adjusted, for cost of living and so forth. So we wanted to bring the customers pretty much into a standard format where their costs go up all at the same time, and they have the same, more or less, rates. There's also a short-term agreement with the Mondavi Vineyards for winter water use, and that's at a reduced rate because it's winter time. And they actually take quite a bit of water, so that's been a good pickup to start serving Mondavi. And here is a history of the recycled water deliveries over about the past 8 years. And you can see that this has gone up from about 231 acre feet per year to about 271 here in 2011. And the Vintners Golf Club is averaging at about 77 acre foot a year. Chimney Rock about 60, Stag's Leap about 45, 46. Clos-du-Val about 53, and Mondavi is about 86 acre foot per year, and they take that in the winter. So we're doing quite well on recycling the effluent. Now it's kind of a symbiotic relationship because the town needs to get rid of the effluent in the summertime, and the growers need the water in the summertime. So what we're now looking at is getting growers to take the water in the wintertime and store it in ponds. So the potential customers, we're calling these the Tier 2 customers. Again, Mondavi, we already have a short-term contract with them. They've got 318 acres. Silverado West and East, over 200 acres combined. Herrick Ranch, and Beringer. So the total is about 953 acres of vineyards. So quite a bit of need there for irrigation. And this is the map showing the system. The blue line here is your existing pipeline system. It goes all the way out here to Chimney Rock. And the red lines are the proposed new additions to that system. And we've got different alternatives. Some of them are involve less new pipeline, and some are more aggressive. But basically, we're expanding on the existing foundation that was started in 1977, and we're going to look at one of the concepts of the rate structure is to have a peak and an off-peak rate. Peak period is the summertime when it's dry, it's hot, folks really want the water. Off-peak is the wintertime, November through May. And again, all of the information I'm presenting today, we don't have any recommendations. We're presenting information. We want to get input, and we want to see what your thoughts are. And so this is to get input. None of these are set in stone. But we're looking at a peak season from June to October, and then an off-peak of November through May. The demand is based on the need for irrigation in the summer and then seasonal storage in the winter. And your National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Permit only allows the town to discharge into the Napa River between October 1st and May 15th of each year, and that's only providing that you have a dilution ratio of 42:1. So in a very dry period, you cannot discharge even between October 1 and May 15th. So there's a need to dispose of the recycled water, and so we want to encourage folks to take it in the off-peak period. Now, your Tier 1 customers are the customers that have helped the town over the years since 1977, and they have a priority on the summer water. They purchase the water, and they've been partners with the town for many, many years, and so we're not proposing to change anything there. The project alternatives, we have 4 alternatives ranging from $1.4 million to $11.7 million. And so the base project is about a $3.2 million project. For $4.3 million, we would expand it to all the Tier 2 customers. This is kind of a build-out project, $11.7 million. And then just a very minimum project, which we've come up with just in the last month, would involve expansion to the Silverado West and the Herrick Ranch only. Funding options, ideally we would get U.S. Bureau of Reclamation grants and state revolving fund loans. That would be the very lowest cost funding. And you've already received 2 planning grants from the State Water Resources Control Board and U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And I just saw this in the Yountville Sun that Mike Thompson is introducing a bill for $1.1 million for recycled water projects for Yountville. So it looks very promising that you'll get some subsidized funding. If that doesn't come through, there's the 100% state revolving fund loan with no grant. Again, that's a loan. You'd pay it back over 20 years at 2.6%, still not bad. And then if that were not feasible, you could fall back on the issuance of bonds up to 30 years, and typically the interest rates are 5 to 6%. But I think you have a very, very good chance of getting this grant and loan package. So that's very good news. When we look at the estimated annual debt service costs for these loan packages, from Alternative 1 to Alternative 4, the range is obviously with the $11.7 million project and a bond, you'd be looking at the most expensive, $1.06 million per year. And with the lowest cost project, $1.4 million, with the 25% grant and 75% SRF loan, you'd be looking at $75,000. So there's quite a range of costs here among these alternatives. Looking at the pricing and the rates, there's cost of service rates where you recover the full cost of service, and then a lot of times in recycled water you can't charge that much. People won't pay that much, so you do a market-based rate, and that's what we're talking about. The recycled water is a valuable commodity. How much are customers willing to pay? Customers typically have alternatives like wells or pumping out of the river. For wells, we estimate the cost at about $26 per acre foot to pump water out of a well. Mondavi has the ability to pump water out of the Napa River when it's allowed, when the flow is adequate. So that's another alternative. These mainly apply to the winter Tier 2 customers. The Tier 1 customers really need the water. They don't have these options as readily apparent. So we're looking at, two-tiered rate structure, a peak tier and an off-peak. And for the off-peak wintertime, we're probably going to be limited to what a grower can charge what it costs them to pump out of a well. If we charge more, they'll just pump the well. But if we charge this amount or less, probably be very attractive to take the recycled water. Your budget currently does not allocate expenses between wastewater and recycled water, so we've estimated the costs for the recycled system. And in the future, perhaps rates at some point could be based on the cost of service recovery of the full cost, but at this point we're just looking at recovering a portion of the cost from the recycled rates. The proposed rate structure, as I mentioned, we'd have the peak June through October, off-peak November through May. We'd have also for Tier 1 customers, they would have the option to give up their priority or trade their priority during the peak season to get water at the off-peak season at a discounted rate, if they could arrange that. The rate components, we have a meter charge, which recovers fixed costs related to the production and also debt service costs, a system replacement charge related to replacing and maintaining the system, the recycled water system, and then, the consumption charge, where you would recover the costs that vary based on the amount of water used, the electricity for pumping and the utilities and the maintenance costs that are directly related to pumping. The cost of pumping has been estimated at about $54,000 for a 336 acre-foot of water, so that works out to about $161 per acre-foot. That's just for the electricity and the O&M to actually pump the water. And when I say pump the water, the treatment plant discharges the recycled water into a pond. And then from that pond on is the recycled water system. So the costs for treating the wastewater are fully borne by the wastewater customers. What we're talking about...
And the Veterans Home.
And the Veterans Home, yes. And what we're talking about is the recycled water cost for the water distribution system, taking the water out of the pond and delivering it to the vineyards. So this is the $54,000 of operating cost, which is essentially about $161 per acre foot. Now, an alternate for the $3.2 million project, if we get the 25% grant, so this is the best financing package, for $3.2 million, we'd have an annual debt service of $169,000. And the recycled water rates cannot bear to pay that, so it has to be paid by the wastewater customers. And so if we divide that annual cost by the 708 customers, we get about a $20 a month charge for wastewater customers. That's just for the capital cost to install the pipelines for the Tier 2 customers under this alternative. We would also be looking at a replacement charge to replace the distribution system on an ongoing basis, and that would be about $164 per month. And then we would be looking at a rate for consumption, and this is essentially a full cost recovery of $161. And that works out to 49 cents per 1,000 gallons or 37 cents per 100 cubic feet. So if we look at alternative 2, same type of analysis, it would be about $27 a month per customer. That's wastewater customer. And then, again, we would have the cost recovery on the consumption charges and the replacement charge. For the $11.7 million project, again, these numbers are getting very high, the monthly cost to the wastewater customer would be about $73. So quite a, I think the current rate is about $36 a month. So this would more than triple, it would triple it basically. So that's pretty expensive. The consumption charge again would be pumping the water to the customers estimated about $161 per acre foot. So for the minimum project, the 1.4 million, be looking at about $9 a month on the wastewater rate, and then again the $161 for the usage charge. So quite a big range of different costs for the different alternatives. Other considerations, for Tier 1 customers, right now you're using up all your summer water. So you could have minimum requirements for how much each customer takes. In other words, say customer A would sign up for 100 acre-foot. Okay, we'll give you 100 acre-foot, but you have to agree to pay for that 100 acre-foot whether you take it or not. So that's a possibility. Dry year versus wet year, you saw in the graph there's quite a variation in how much recycled water is sold. We could phase in the rates to minimize the impact, and we would, like to see the rates all go in at the same time, just for simplicity, and that we think November 1st will be a good time of the year to do that, and then increase the rates based on the Consumer Price Index escalator. We have a little survey of recycled water rates. And right now, your rates, the average meter charge is about $392 a month, and the Tier 1 rate per 100 cubic foot is 25 cents. And then when you put that in acre foot, that's $108 per acre foot. For Napa Sanitation, their rate is 68 cents per 100 cubic foot. So that's quite a bit more. And you can see these rates vary all over the place, and some customers do have tiered rates. So Santa Rosa has tiered rates, Irvine Ranch Water District has tiered rates, and some have different rates for different types of irrigation. So the next steps are to get your input, hear public comment, and calculate final rates to bring back for a final presentation.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions Council has specifically about the presentation so far? Vice Mayor?
One question that I had, and I don't know if this is feasible or not, if you've looked at it. I know that some of the vineyards that are up in the mountains truck in water. Mm-hmm. Is there? I don't know where they get their water. If it's just from a company that pumps it out of the ground. Is that have you guys ever considered that as a possibility of somebody to sell it to or give it to?
The town does sell water. Well, we actually give it away. Recycled water. So water trucks do come. They could come get the recycled water. So that's a possibility. Usually it's used for construction, but that's a possibility if people are interested in doing that. It's a very small quantity. That's less than 1% of the recycled water that's used is trucked.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions so far?
Just a couple.
Councilmember Hall?
Thank you. So, why? I mean, I'm going to ask sort of a naive question here.
Sure.
It's winter time. Not this winter. It's an unusual example. But why do I want? I mean, I got my pond. It's full of wastewater coming out of my plant or whatever. Why do I want to buy water? I mean, what's going to compel me other than the price to do it?
Well, it's a pretty drought-resistant water supply. So if you get hooked up to the recycled water system, you're pretty much guaranteed at any winter you're going to have water.
Summer.
Or summer.
Yeah.
I meant winter, though.
Well, we'd like
this winter we didn't get much rain, right?
Yeah.
This would have been the summer or the winter to do it. I can't remember which season we're in. I guess one question I would have is, so the proposals that you put together, the estimates on numbers, does that include building the retaining ponds?
No.
No, they're already, those would be furnished by the customers.
By the individuals?
Yes.
Okay, that was my next question. So I want to make sure I understand then. We have discharged on average 336 acre feet into Napa River since 2004 to 2011. Is that what I read? Is that what I just saw?
I think that was the amount that was recycled.
Pardon me. So
Yeah,
how much have we discharged back into the river? I look at my
over
colleague in the
200.
back.
So it's usually around averaging about 50 to 60%, so about the same amount.
180 gallons?
200 and something.
Oh, so this is already lost income to the town because in potentially we could have been selling this resource, but we haven't had the means by which to distribute it or maybe the customers by which to acquire it.
But it's also a loss. We'd be selling it at a loss. Is the
Correct,
issue.
but any income is better than when just pouring it into the river at this point.
Correct, but we also need to realize our system operates on a unique constraint, and that's one of the reasons we needed to actually drill down and show you. The nature of our system is we have to get rid of the effluent, and when the regional board doesn't let us put it in the river, they don't care. They still say, you have to get rid of it, and you can't put it in the river. So actually, the current environment we're in right now is our classic worst-case scenario. We have a dry winter. We're borderline on whether we meet the release conditions to put the product into the river. But as Don likes to refer to it, we have a very consistent production of our product. I mean, it doesn't vary a whole lot. So we have a real double whammy because usually in the winter season when we do have natural rain, the smaller agricultural, we don't have a challenge in the summer. In fact, we could get rid of more. So we've got a metering and a flow issue, if you will, but we have to increase capacity. We are going to have some conversations with the regional board, but I mean, that's kind of the unique. And the lesson learned is, as you saw in the information, we are not going to be able to recover the capital costs, regardless of project. That's one of the reasons you now see a project number 4, as opposed to some of the others. And our system, when it was built, never recovered the capital costs. So our focus right now is to try to at least recover more of the direct operating costs related to getting the water to the end user, therefore reducing a little bit of the burden. I mean, just from where we're at, it'll almost be double to get to full cost recovery and of just the operating expense. And that's really kind of the best that we're going to be able to do realistically. I think the good news that you saw when you relate back to our rates when we proposed our utility rate increase is that the first two scenario 1 and scenario 4 are generally covered in our rate structure. We anticipated needing to use some debt structure, so that's very favorable. That $11.7 million project, that's nowhere near our proposed budget, so I think that one will have a short-lived discussion when it comes to you in a more project detail. But this is a really challenging environment because your staff's come to the conclusion that our cost recovery goals aren't as aggressive as I would like them to be on this.
Just to follow along that, there's several issues we wanted to bring to your attention. It's the weather is really a driver on this. It's really the variable that affects us. So if we had a very dry year in 2009 and we recycled 80% of the water because they needed water and we were able to provide it. The next year, 2010, was a very wet year, so they didn't need to irrigate when they had rain falling on their vineyards. So we had all this water, and so we couldn't recycle it. The other issue is that it's supply and demand. So it's the storage that if we get storage during the winter months or spring, we could put that water into the ponds, and then they could use that during the rest of the summer. Some customers, Stag's Leap has very little storage, so they need water almost all the time, almost every week. Other customers, like Clos-de-Val, have a big pond, so they could fill up that water during the spring and then not have to purchase as much during the summer. So we have different customers who have different usage. The other thing is you look at the variability on the survey of how come we don't charge more money. Irvine Company, for example, they provide the water and they provide the wastewater treatment. So when a customer comes and says, I want to buy water from you, they say, okay, well, we also want to sell you recycled water at 90% for your irrigation. They force them to put in an irrigation meter to buy the water at 90% because they're the only game in town. In our situation, we're asking customers to purchase the recycled water. The selling point is that it's a reliable source. If there was a long multi-year drought, we're essentially going to keep their vineyards alive because we'll have this recycled water as a source of water for them because they won't be able to pump it out of the ground. So, you look at what is the value of sustainability and reliability. If you lose a vineyard, it takes 3 years to get it in production again. So there is a value to that, but how much are they willing to pay for that when some customers can just pump it out of the river? So we've sort of taken care of the low-hanging fruit. Now we're trying to find some new customers to bring on that could essentially get us to have some storage during the spring. So that's essentially what we wanted to bring to you tonight. We also invited the recycled water customers and potential customers to the meeting. We've been sending them information. We've had a workshop with them, or a stakeholder meeting. So we just wanted to sort of give you an update on what we've done so far and sort of kind of where we're headed. And we want to find out from you are there certain things that you would like us to look into more, or any opinions on where we're headed?
I have one last question. I'm sorry, if I may. So you also talked about this, the minimum, I want to call it the minimum project.
Right.
Does that meet the, not that I'm being minimalist, but does that meet the California Regional Water Quality Board's requirements for us by December 13th?
We believe so. It
2013?
needs to be confirmed.
Okay, so we potentially have an alternative that is going to meet the minimum standards, whether that's, I mean, on the board or on the table at this juncture. We've at least considered something of that nature.
Right. By having this study done and looking at the costs to the customers, we would make an argument to the Regional Water Quality Control Board that we are expanding the system, and that we're not burdening our customers too much. And that's essentially the argument we'll make, but they're the regulatory agency, and we have the permit with them, and so they do have the final say.
But I want to make sure we recognize that the customers that are being burdened are not just those that are going to be buying the recycled water,
Right.
it's those of us that are producing the waste.
Correct. It's the Veterans Home and the customers who are sewer
Right.
sewer rate payers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to just summarize, for the rates, we were kind of thinking for the peak rate, like the $161 per acre foot, and that's basically the cost of pumping the water out of the pond and up to the vineyards. For the off-peak, basically the cost of pumping a well, which is $26 an acre foot. So that's kind of what we're looking at this point.
Yeah, I have some questions about the new customers. I'm assuming that all the new customers do not have pipes currently, and our old customers, they do have pipes.
Right.
So have you had discussions with the new customers about the cost of running pipes so they can get water? I'm assuming they all need pipes, or they're not going to truck it in, or
No, yeah, it'd be piped
get it?
in.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll defer to
Yeah,
Graham.
the town has kind of set a precedent in that the town built the pipeline to Chimney Rock in the first place, and then also pipes to Clodoval and Stag's Leap. So this is a question that came up in the request for proposal process. Other agencies have said, well, if you want the water, you need to build a pipeline. So the town has not gone there, and so we are looking at this as the town would build the pipeline to get the water to the storage pond, and then they would purchase the water.
And those pipes, I'm assuming, would be extremely costly.
That's what generates that 1.4 to 3.2 million cost for the most part.
It's most of the pipeline, the design, the construction management.
Okay, so considering the cost of those additional pipes for the Tier 2 customers, is there, even though we've set a precedent, I mean, I'm sure we could certainly have a discussion because, it is very costly. Would we have to build all new pipes and go through CEQA and all that, which I'm sure is very different today than it probably was in '77? So, it might not even be feasible.
Right.
Running a pipe under the Napa River today, can't even imagine.
Right. The CEQA NEPA process, CEQA was not in place until 1978, so
Right.
that was not an issue back then.
Right.
But there were still, issues in terms of design, construction, permitting. Fish and Game still, issued permits back then. But to have the customer pay for the cost of the pipeline essentially would probably make it too expensive for the customer.
Right.
Even if their advantage would probably be to pay a yearly cost for the water as opposed to a big capital cost up front, even if they had their own bonds and did it themselves. So it's the same issue that we have of we don't just have money lying around to go build a pipeline. They don't have money to do the same. So
Right.
we're both in the same boat. And so what we're looking at is if the town builds it, we could potentially get 25% financing from the federal, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We could do the bonds and then have the costs spread out over a number of years, 20 years or so is being proposed.
But, I have a couple more questions. So we would still be paying back the bond, and so the current ratepayers at Veterans Home and our residents would be paying back that bond for the water. So we've really got to weigh a lot of pieces.
Well, and I think you're on to why I started the premise of the way you have to understand how our system is set up, which is the ratepayers have historically, from the start of the structure of the system, paid for the distribution because we have to have a means to dispose of the treated effluent. And if everybody says no, we still have to have a means of disposing of the treated effluent, and that's our conundrum in the operation of the system. Some places have spraying fields and other various things that they use. We sort of have used the irrigation model, and now we're finding that we need a bit more capacity. So we're working on some models, but that's why I say it's a rude awakening as to how far in our cost recovery we can go and what's the burden of the Veterans Home and the 800 ratepayers. And the lion's share falls on the system, not the recycled water customers.
So am I right in assuming that our real priority is trying to get rid of this water and how we're going to pay for it, not really standardizing the rates that's going to be acceptable to our Tier 1
Yeah, that's what's
customers?
driving it. It's the wastewater, effluent and the state board coming down on you and saying you have to expand your system. So now it's a matter of how much do you want to expand it and what do you want to charge for the water?
That's all the questions for now.
Okay. Actually, Councilmember Dornbeck.
Thank you. I'd like to find out, prior to committing to building this pipeline, are we going to get commitments from the customers?
There's current agreements, so we would look at those agreements with these customers and then start negotiations with potential new customers to say, this is what we're looking at. Again, we can't force customers to take the water, so this is a voluntary agreement that would be with these customers. So the price also drives that.
But
Excuse me.
to be really simple, the answer is yes. If potential customer Silverado West doesn't want the water, we're not building the pipeline to Silverado West. So I want to make it real clear, we would have those understanding and commitments made prior to the construction. And all of the potential property owners have been working with us because, as you know, we are in the environmental and the design. They've walked the routes. We're discovering, Indian relics that we have to deal with and various other things. So all of those potential folks are really aware, and that's why we're having the conversation with you now, because we need to understand a few of those premises. For example, if somebody says, oh, well, we'll make potential customer X, you've got to pay for your line expansion and then we'll charge you Y for the rate, we're probably going to be able to go have that conversation and they'll come back and say thank you, but no thank you, because the other thing for us, the minimum project that we've identified is on this side of the river, so it's the lowest expansion, lowest cost. Unfortunately, it's also to people that theoretically have rights to pull out of the river and potentially out of the aquifer because they sit in a better water position than what some of the customers along Silverado Trail do. So their cost analysis is different than what somebody in Silverado. So that adds to that factor, which is what's our competition. Now, the only other good thing I'll share with you is they're under competing regulatory compliance issues as far as pumping out of the river and pulling out. So, it's not getting cheaper for them. And, for example, you're not pulling out of the river this year. So if you're a customer along the river that typically filled your reservoirs with river water because of the low volume, you're not doing it. So it's a very dynamic and dicey environment we find ourselves in, and trying to figure out a happy balance that has the recycled water customer paying a greater share than it has been, but where that soft spot is that allows us to make sure that we can have a more reliable distribution system for removing our flow that we need to do.
Thank you. Maybe you can answer this too then. In December of 2010, when we began or when we raised the utility rates, how much did we raise the wastewater rates at that time?
The wastewater or recycled water? Was that for the wastewater
wastewater.
customers or the recycle?
Wastewater.
17%, I think, was, but there were some variabilities because there were some changes from 50/50, because the rate structure and all. So as part of the ad hoc,
And-
it wasn't exactly 17%. It varied.
And the 5-year rate plan does propose a certain level of debt structure, which is why I wanted to point out that 2 of the alternatives that are presented to you, when you saw the number $8 or $18 factored into what the cost to the customer, those are already factored into our approved rate structure that you've already approved. 2 of the scenarios aren't, but 2 would be reasonably covered by the rate structure. So we anticipated that cost. Really, to be perfectly honest, we had expectations that we might be able to do a little better cost recovery of some of the capital going forward, and we're learning that that's not realistic, which has also caused staff to go back and focus on alternative number 4, which is that minimum expansion project.
Right. Just to clarify for everybody, when you look at the slides, it says $8 per month. That's essentially already built into the rates that people are. It's going to be escalating 17% for the 5 years, so that's already been built in there. So.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor, questions about the presentation?
Yeah, well, you just answered that question. I wondered if any of this was already built in. Speaking of the low river water right now and our inability to discharge, what do our adjoining jurisdictions up valley, what does St. Helena and Calistoga do? I mean, how do they handle this issue, which I'm sure they have as well?
Calistoga has an issue with their boron in the water, so they can't get rid of it. They can't sell it. Nobody wants to buy it. So the quality of their water is a detriment to them. So they're, I'm not sure how they are discharging it. St. Helena doesn't really have customers. They have hay fields, kind of situation like the town used to have, where this sprayed on the fields and really don't sell it to anybody, as far as I know. The little bit I've talked with our 2 public works directors. So they're not in the same situation. Yountville is pretty unique in terms of having people who actually want to buy the water, and the town just built the chlorine contact chamber to provide tertiary treated water, which is even a better quality. So it's kind of, in a way, we're saying, why would we just discharge this good water into the Napa River when people could use it for vineyards? Calistoga doesn't have that same situation where they can't even get rid of it.
So I guess my question is, are there other alternatives for us other than recycling the water to discharge it that's not the river?
Well,
we don't have hay fields really here anymore.
Well, actually, the short answer, though, part of it's the original system design. I mean, there are sludge methods and various different things. There is another mechanism, which is we go out and purchase property so that we can create a hay field and we spray it. And that's typically, when you talk about some other entities, that's what they do. And then they percolate and allow the water to dissipate back into the groundwater. So, I mean, and it's perfectly scientifically very sound. That's what a lot of agencies do. We can certainly put an equation and see if any of our adjacent neighbors might be willing to sell us a few acres and what the cost would be, because that's really our only other alternative at all. Not, I mean, that really is our other mechanism. We need to put it someplace.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about $11 million, as crazy as it sounds to buy a piece of property, or I don't know if it takes half an acre or we need 50 acres, but as expensive as land is, it may not be more expensive than what we're
We
proposing.
also will tell you that that full, we'd love to do this nice loop all around the world system. It basically saw the light of day and died the same half minute later. So, I mean, it's there so we can compare it. We need that information to show the regulatory agencies, to show the folks why some of these alternatives, even as expensive as they are going to be probably a preferred product as opposed to some of the others. But if we don't do the homework on it, we can't have that conversation. And then obviously you saw we've added another one. We certainly can take a look at what buying a couple acres might be and add that to an evaluation. We've also looked, but not really able to, how to move the water up further to Veterans Home. But the challenge there is that requires pumping stations because you're going uphill, which adds another fixed operating cost. We've also looked at, which I think would go over like a lead balloon here, but, we are talking water storage, so another alternative, although not cheap, is building water tanks. You see them all over the Midwest, and they go up, and you pump water up, and then it comes down. I'm not sure that that would be viewed from an aesthetic standpoint in a high, but that's certainly another alternative when you look at why would we spend $12 million. There's probably an alternative short of that. We do think our 1.4 minimum project meets the threshold requirements that the regional board has had, and your staff is certainly dedicated to spending the time to work with the regional board and find out why they would tell us it doesn't.
So I just have a couple more. Most of my questions have been asked already. The fact that we're only talking about 4 additional Tier 2 new customers, is it basically driven by topography? And Steve, you just touched on it about you can't go uphill. Are we not going north and south for similar reasons, that the infrastructure would just be too vast and too expensive to even build? Or why are we talking about such a small, relatively small area?
You are correct. Is it going uphill requires more pumping, more electricity, more cost. So we're looking at the least expensive alternatives. If we went further, it's more pipeline, it's more electric costs, which would drive even higher than the cost we propose here.
But you'd get a couple customers maybe out of that, but not worth the additional expense.
Right. Storage is the key. If we build a 5 million gallon tank at the treatment plant, it really doesn't give us 2-3 days of supply. We need a 50 acre foot tank or storage pond like the one at Clos-de-Val.
And I think, John, a real key thing, Mayor, would be to go back and look at that one picture. Part of this whole system was how do you connect the existing agricultural infrastructure that already has reservoirs and holding ponds. So the system was designed to, there you go, if you'll notice, it was designed around what was already built in that environment. So
okay, yeah. So
that's what drove the preferred routes and the evaluation. And you'll see the one concept that's not shown high on that was the 11.7 brings it back down and does a loop system there.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need to go into much detail about the $11 million system. Last question I have, and then I want to hear from any members of the public. Working backwards, December 2013, how soon do we have to make a decision and start on whatever we're talking about? It sounds like pretty soon.
Yeah, we're currently on schedule. We're going through the environmental review process, and then we get into design and all. So at this point we are. But if we were to take a year off and say, we need to do more studies or things like that, then we would need to talk to the Regional Water Quality Control Board about an extension.
So what are we talking about in terms of your returning with fairly solid choices for us to make a decision on? Weeks? Days?
Assume a
month.
A month.
Okay.
Month or so.
Okay. And I guess I will add a bonus question in here. The H.R. 3910 that Congressman Thompson is actively pushing for, I don't remember if there's any restriction on that money in terms of it being for operating costs or capital. Which would be fine with us still.
Let me clarify. That matches, remember, we originally talked, if you go to the 4.2, and 25% of 4.2 comes out to, ironically, about 1.1. So that was what one of our targets in our core budget was built on. So that's consistent with the second low-cost scenario. So, obviously, if we came in lower than that, then we wouldn't receive the full potential match of that. But we still need to evaluate those. So it's tracking very well. That's matching, what was all along. I think Graham referred to it now as the base project, is roughly that. So, we will probably be putting, very candidly, most of our emphasis on the base and the minimum project.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I'll invite members of the public, anyone that would like to talk about this, to do so now. Please. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. My name's Al Wagner. I'm the Director of Vineyard Operations at Clos-de-Val, and I have a few comments to make. as of course. First off, we would appreciate that we receive any information on the discussions for in the future other than Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon on a holiday weekend. So my comments are jotted down over lunch and my kids shuffling, so I apologize for that. We appreciate the water that we get, and we have since 1998, I believe, and I've been involved with Clodoval since 2001, so I've been all through the whole process. We don't have any objections to other users, but there are some inconsistencies with the recycle water rates on here. I'll just read through my notes. Request that your numbers are accurate before making any rate increase decisions. The existing tiered users and Table 1 of the current recycle water rate section on page 2 is inaccurate, stating our meter charges are only during pumping times. Our contract, we're contracted to pay you monthly, so we pay on a 12-month basis, and we probably paid over $13,000 this year instead of $8,000. So that's been right all the way through. So I don't know, I'm not privy with what the other rate users are or what, if that's playing into anything. So the other thing is, yeah, we've paid meter charges every month. Total usage, recycle water is about $13,000. Also would recommend that you look at the existing acreage on the property behind us, which is adjacent to us, which is owned by the Ragushi-Simone Partnership. There's about 50 acres of vineyards there that is not in the plan study. That could be hooked up with a 20-foot piece of pipe and not any more incurred costs on the current infrastructure. That is not currently using recycled water. There's 2 more parcels in the back, I believe. The other thing moving forward, new customers and existing ones who are not currently paying meter charges, we would hope that that they would be billed at an equal or greater value than we currently are, because right now it's an inequity. Mondavi was supposed to be a temporary use situation, and we pay $600 and something a month, and they pay nothing. And they were not the ones that wanted to use the recycled water in the beginning when we took it on from day one, along with the other users. The other thing, we do have wells. We have the potential of filling our reservoirs with wells and sub-drainage, so we don't need the recycled water, but we do it because we want to be green and we want to be sustainable and help the community. That's why we do it. So at the current rate situation is affordable. If we start to see the rates increase very much more, it becomes not possible. Because if you calculate the $108 plus our meter charge every month, we're actually paying about $265 an acre foot when you start to do the calculations. So those have to be considered, because once you hit that price and another $30, you're at Napa sanitation costs, and I know the agricultural users do not want the water at that rate. So that's for your knowledge. The other thing, as you look forward into Tier 1 and Tier 2, will you renegotiate our contract terms, which allow us to buy water in the off-season at $25 versus $108? That's not been looked at. We currently take water now all winter. When Don needs space, we dump water into the vineyard. We irrigate when we don't need to, and we're taking water and paying the $108. So I think the tier situation probably doesn't need to be looked at, and I don't think it's fair. The other thing, when you store water, you have additional costs involved. Treatment of the water in our own ponds, where we have to use algicides or dyes to keep the algae down. We also inject with acid as we inject out into the vineyard, because our pH levels in the water tend to rise at different times of the year. So those are other things, another additional cost that we have. So anyway, I won't hold you up anymore. Those are just some comments, and thank you.
Sure. Actually, I think the Vice Mayor has a question.
Oh, yes, Mr. Wagner, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
We were having the discussion about other entities essentially spraying fields just to let it soak into the ground. When you do that in the winter, does it have, I don't know anything about raising grapes, does it have really any effect on I mean, can you just spray water and it's like having rainy days and it doesn't
It's
matter?
exactly, like right now, we've had 9.5 inches, and we're used to 24 inches, so if I put on a 24-hour irrigation, that's like 24 gallons per vine, which still doesn't equal up to the 24 inches we put on every year. So I would rather see a fully charged soil profile going into bud break, and as would most growers. So I don't think that that's an issue.
So there's benefit not just for the storage for the summer, but of actually irrigating during the winter.
In short rainfall years. This is the first shortage I've seen since I've been in the valley for 11 years. We do this typically to help the town of Yountville out. We will dump water in the winter to make room in the ponds when there's a low discharge period in the river.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your additional information and being such a good customer for us.
And I do want to point out a few things that Mr. Wagner approached, because he has some very valid points, and staff's working on it, and we're trying to address a few. One, the $13,000 that he refers to is built into that $30,000 of revenue. So I do want to point that out. We also appreciate the idea of looking a little more into the Ragusi property, which we will do. That's why we tried to have meetings and various things to learn more. When we put Tier 1 and Tier 2, really what we're trying to do with our structure is identify our prior commitments to the existing users, and that's what we refer to as Tier 1. And certainly, we would make available that's one of the things that the rate structure will look at, is that if you're using water in a off-peak season, they're not going to get charged. So that we do want to have some equity in the system. Our agreements will look different. They do need to be modernized and reflect where we're going. We also need to review one of our points that Mr. Dove mentioned. We do need to standardize some of our meter rates and some of those fixed costs, and those will be the same going forward. But what we really are trying to do is make sure we honor our commitment to the historic Tier 1 users, that the supply will be available during peak season, and as you saw, roughly at what it cost us to get it to them, not including capital. That's the premise that we're bringing to you today. We're working on what that reduced rate during the peak season would be, and it would only be available when people are using the water in Tier 2. So we really do understand and appreciate a number of Mr. Wagner's comments, because that really is consistent with how we are trying to do this and meeting the goals and objectives of, well, I shouldn't necessarily say the goal because they're telling us we have to, but we do have some requirements from the Regional Water Quality Board that make us have to do some things, and the only way we can grow right now and meet what they need is to do the off-peak season. We've got to find more storage. We don't have a problem in the summer. And we definitely do hear and understand Mr. Wagner's point, and that was part of our presentation. There is a natural level of cost, whereas if we go higher than that, those users that have well opportunities or pumping opportunities will evaluate that, and there's a threshold where they say that rate's not competitive, we don't want it.
So, Graham, let me just ask this question, then I'll invite any other members of the public. The sale of the Mondavi estate has no impact on our agreement with the Vineyard property. Is that true?
We have the original 3 agreements, which are in place. The Mondavi agreement is a temporary, so we would essentially look at that agreement to make it more permanent and look at our rates with those. And, well, we're looking at the rates for everybody, both the meter and the commodity charge.
But those are uniquely short-term, the agreement so far with Mondavi versus some of these other.
Let me clarify on that, Mayor. You're referring to what's known as the homestead of the Mondavi estate, and that's not the property that we're referring to.
That's what I was trying to make sure that there's a separation. I know that the estate sale didn't really impact the ownership of the majority of the vineyard land.
That's correct.
Okay. So any other members of the public, would you like to comment on this at this point? No, doesn't look like it. So time for the council to discuss and try to give a little bit more guidance. I'll invite Councilmember Dornbecker to make any comments if you would like to.
Well, I see the necessity of having to do this, and I'm certainly not in favor of going the $11 million. I just put that right out there right now. But, and I do feel very strongly that we want to work with our long-standing customers to make sure that they have the best deal, because they deserve it. They've been with us the longest. That's just my opinion. And, you know, I'm glad to know that this was envisioned when we did do the wastewater and utilities schedule of increases, because I know that the town members, town residents were not happy about that to begin with. And so knowing that this was part of the plan, I hope they're aware of that. But I think as we get further along, I'd like to have a little more confidence that Herrick Ranch and Behringer and Silverado East and West, that they're on board, because, you know, and I don't know whether or not it's worth considering, but talking to the Veterans Home about whether or not they have a hayfield might help us out a bit. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Mueller?
I think when we looked at our own internal water and wastewater numbers, I think something that worked out really well that all the council ended up adopting was, you know, coming up with some of those big Excel charts where we actually increase the meter charge to a fixed rate, and then we could play with the numbers in terms of, you know, the acre feet. I think all that needs to be standardized, but I think that approach that we took for our own customers in town really makes a lot of sense with this, and that way, because I think the most imperative thing really is to not have this wide spread of meter charge. We really need to fix that, and that approach would be something that I think would follow too. These Tier 2 customers, I just don't have enough information. I mean, certainly you've identified some, they're potential customers, you know, we really don't know. I'm very concerned with these potentially extremely expensive pipelines that we're going to have to build and make our own internal water customers, you know, even possibly have to pay more than we've already got. I'd like to help them out, but yeah, I think it really kind of comes down to the finances there. So I'm not really wild on really taking that approach. I really kind of like exploring at least more the hayfield-like approach. I mean, right now we've got an agreement with the Nord Vineyard, you know, right outside of town for the extra storm runoff. I mean, is that something that, you know, how much, there's about, I don't know, 10 or 20 acres out there. I mean, could they absorb some of that? Is that something that we could negotiate? You know, some more creative thinking into putting that out, or, you know, I'd even consider our Tier 1 customers, you know, like our Clos de Vol partner, you know, giving some kind of bonus for them to do that. We've already got the infrastructure. It's not going to cost a lot, but I'd rather really explore all that. You know, it seems like that's a less cost drain alternative. I mean, if these Tier 2 customers are just really needing this water, I will factor that in, but I just don't see that coming through the information we have right now. Also, you know, putting a little more effort into, you know, it's a great suggestion about the Ragusa, you know, additional acreage. So really exploring that before we really launch into the red line is something that I'd like to see. So it seems like we've got a lot of stuff to kind of go through over the next several months to kind of get here, but.
Well, this is a feasibility study, and that's the
Right.
intent, is to look at all the alternatives and to find, you know, talk to the customers and find potential alternatives.
Right.
So this is the time to brainstorm and to look at those alternatives and options.
So right now, you know, cost effectiveness is really going to mean a lot to me going forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, and I want to thank the town staff and our consultants who've come in and given us some good work here. It's it's interesting and a grateful position to be in, I guess, that we've got enough recycled water that we can do something with it. I mean, it's a pretty valuable resource, and it's relatively finite, as we all know. So thanks to Graham and your team with Dawn and the others. I guess what I would start off by saying is, we need to do an evaluation, as we have, on what is feasible to the town. Ultimately, this is going to come back to the residents, the users of the services, and we're going to end up writing the checks for it to support, the long-term, apparently state-mandated requirement that we recycle or dispose of the recycled water that we have. To that end, we need to do our diligence. I think we've started that process, and I'm grateful. But there's obviously, I think, some additional things we could evaluate, as Mr. Green pointed out, from his neighbors to the north, to the Ragushi property. Potentially, there's opportunity there. The other thing I would ask, and maybe I'll just put it as a rhetorical question, is are there other ways we can use recycled water in the town? We have quite a few parks. People keep talking about the hayfield, which doesn't exist, but we do have a lot of parks, and I know we are probably already using them, so it's rhetorical saying, can we just start disposing of water there, with the exception, understand that, children do play in those parks, or people do have picnics there, but when it's raining and there's a lot of water, there's no reason to not let it out.
Actually, to answer that question real quick, we have looked at it, and the first thing I want to say is Title 22, our tertiary water is safe for everybody to use, or it wouldn't be able to be used on an agricultural food crop. So putting it in our own, we have evaluated that, and frankly, our park space, the infrastructure cost to pipe the water to our parks and simply the amount of turf, when you talk about cost effective, it's the wrong direction.
Probably why there's no pipes in red on this thing back into town, which was
We
my
looked
first
at it.
observation.
That's one of the first areas we started at. We just wouldn't use enough, and then we're not, going back again, one thing we need to clarify, we need to increase our winter consumption. We don't really, that's the same challenge we are. What we really need is a hole into the aquifer that we could just find someplace, a nice rupture someplace that we can just sort of put in, it recharges. I mean, this is good stuff to recharge the aquifer.
Right.
And to a degree, that's what the vineyards are using, but that's our challenge. But yes, we have looked at internal, and it's not cost effective.
Just to follow on that, the little red line here is between the recycled water line at Land Lane up to Veterans Memorial Park. So our consultants, GHD, has looked at that. It gets back to the issue of storage, where unless you have a storage tank that can store it, for long periods of time, it's really not cost effective. The other issue is when we need to irrigate the parks the most is in the summer, and that's the same time that the Tier 1 customers, we'd be competing with them. Right. So there's not enough water to go around during the summer, and there's too much water in the winter. But we don't irrigate the parks. Yeah, except
this year.
And that's one of the things we are starting to look at too is those extremes. What happens if during a extreme drought situation, and what happens during extreme rainfall situation? So we're going to talk to the regional board about that and share this with them. We'll actually be speaking at the Water Reuse Conference in March about this as well. And so these are issues that are going on statewide, nationwide. And so I think we're not the only ones in the boat, but we're also leading on a lot of things, and we're unique in some ways as well. So it is a complex issue, and so we appreciate you guys listening to us tonight and give us some direction.
Yeah. I guess to wrap up, I would say I'm also not in favor, coming from Texas, where they have water towers that basically that's how you knew where you lived, as you could see the name of your city. I don't think the residents of Yountville would be interested in such a thing, and I think ultimately what we owe this community is really to look at what is the most cost-effective mechanism, and I'm leaning, or I would lead towards, doing whatever the minimum is to meet the standard of the requirements, unless we could see that there's some ultimate payback, because these are big capital infrastructure costs, and we've got plenty of other capital items that we could be investing money in. But thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Just for visualization, am I correct that an acre-foot of water is the size of an acre that's 1 foot deep?
Correct.
Is that right? I'm trying to visualize a tank that's 50 acre-foot. It's pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of everything that's been said here. I think that if we went back to that slide that had the 4 alternatives and the prices, I think it was an Excel.
There it is.
Whoops, did I go too far?
Well, it's the one that showed, yeah, well, let's just use that let's use that for an example.
Okay.
I think what would be very helpful the next time we see this is to talk about not just what the cost is per wastewater customer, which is essentially the residents, or I know that's not exactly the same, but each customer that we have, of how much is already included in the rates we've already passed, and what's that additional amount over. Because if we're talking about the base or the minimum already being included, this conversation feels a lot easier than if that's additional on top. So I think exactly where that number hits hopefully will be very useful.
Well, let's talk about this. This is the Tier 1 and 2, $3.2 million, the expansion project, spread out over 20 years, 708 customers, so essentially it'd be about $20 per month. I don't know if Doug and Kat remember, but if this was the actual dollar amount included in the rate study, but I think it's about in that ballpark. So over the 5 years, by the time the rates get to their highest point, it would cover this cost, because this is the 3.2, which is about what we were estimating for the project when we set the rates.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we could do this, you call it the base study, the alternate base projection, base project, alternate one, and what has already been put in place is already
Because we
covered.
assume the financing and everything.
So thank you. That makes me feel even better. I think what I want to look at this as is when we talk about the rate payers, the customers are subsidizing this. This is really, in a regulatory scheme, a cost of doing business. And what I want to be careful about, and it's Mr. Wagner, who likes to be green, what he is basically saying is, hey, we want to do it because it's good, but there's a economic cost at some point as well. And I think if you look at the Mondavi contract, for example, we needed to unload water. We figured out what they would be willing to pay, and if it wasn't a meter charge, it wasn't a meter charge, and we certainly want to be fair. But I look at this, if I'm saying we're getting $30,000 of revenue out of this, but we're having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, I don't want to risk that over small amounts of money that really hit the users much harder than it does us. The flip side is, it looks bad to be giving free water out when all we hear about is water, how much it costs to what everybody thinks are very wealthy wineries, et cetera, whether they are or not is a whole different story. So I think certainly there's a fairness issue that has to be balanced on all sides. I think what's been really great for me on this conversation is the concept of storage. We keep talking about storage or tanks, et cetera. To me, it's not really storage. It's disposal of treated water. And if it's a wet year and we're able to put it in the Napa River, and that's an okay thing to do, then I assume last year that was an okay thing to do, and this year it's not. The good news is they need more water this year, so I'll be interested to see where that number spikes up. And, this may be as simple as if we have one of those years that we have an agreement with, I was going to say Clos de Vol, is that right? That was right, okay. I almost said Chimney Rock, and I didn't want to offend you on that. That with Clos de Vol or with Mondavi or with Silverado or anybody hey, we just want to irrigate your vineyards. We'll give it to you for free. You're helping us out. It helps you out a little bit, et cetera. If that's where we need to get in the off season and that's the price of admission to get to buy it when it's good, then let's do something like that. But I think it really comes down to that benefit, and that water must make it down to the aquifer somehow.
It does.
So that can't be a bad thing. He's shaking his head no for the second time. I thought we could pump it back down our well, but that may not work.
Napa River.
Napa River, there you go.
After it goes 6 feet through the soil.
Excellent. All right. Well, that would be good for the fish. So I think we should think of it as disposal and storage for the summer is one idea, or for ourselves, but how can we get rid of it at the most economical and environmentally friendly way to do it? So thank you.
Thanks. And almost everything that I was going to bring up has been brought up, especially the last point the Vice Mayor made about needing total clarity on, we're not talking about raising rates $20 if we go with the $3.2 million project. I think it's been presented in a way that can be misconstrued. So we need that clarity. If that means we break even in the existing rate structure, that's the way we need to explain that. And if we're talking about even the lower alternative, then what does that mean in terms of what happens with the additional revenue in that new rate structure? What does that go toward? The only other thing I wanted to make clear, and Steve, our town manager, touched on this, it sounds almost like we're asking our residents in the veterans home to pay for the system for the wineries. But it's really our obligation as wastewater creators to get rid of that wastewater. And so if we had no vineyards out there, we'd have a much bigger problem on our hands. So we at least have people like Mr. Wagner's property and the other properties that are helping partner to do the right thing. But if they weren't interested in doing the right thing, we'd still be in a world of hurt. And, you know, I get the sense that we're being treated by the state like many other areas in a much larger and a much different set of circumstances than we, but we're stuck with the regulations anyway. So we're having to make the best out of a very challenging situation for a town as small as us in the setting, physical setting that we are in. So I just think a better, clearer understanding of exactly what we're talking about with potential rate impacts. In some cases, they won't be going up at all, and if they are going up, exactly how much and over what period of time. I think that's going to be critical. So I just hope that we do have more customers like Mr. Wagner and some of the others that have been on board for a long time that are not only doing the right thing, maybe it's because they need it at times, but they're doing it because it's being good neighbors at other parts of the year. So let's continue to find more of those neighbors that are willing to be that kind of customer with us. So. And we'll be back in not too distant future, it sounds like, because we really need to stay on top of this to meet that state mandate.
Yes.
So thanks for a very thorough explanation. It gets pretty complicated sometimes going, it's kind of almost against, you know, we're talking about water in the winter and water in the summer and when you need it, when you don't need it, and who wants it when. But thanks for clearing it up for all of us.
Thank
and
you.
hopefully we'll get a great solution that's very, you know, as affordable as we can make it. So. You need any other feedback from us, Graham, or you have enough to work with for now? And certainly the continued outreach with our existing Tier 1 to get additional feedback. I think just the few comments that we heard tonight are of value to you as you're evaluating what you're going to present to us, and also trying as much as we can to get that feedback from the potential new customers,
Yeah, we will.
just to hear exactly what those conditions are. All right, thank you very much for that. With that, we're going to move on to the next item, which is Capital Improvement Program Workshop, a status update and discussion of the town's 5-year capital improvement program.
Can we take a quick break?
Do we need a little break? Okay, so we will take just a 5-minute break. Recording?
I'm starting it, yes.
Okay, great.
just
So
set that
we
up
are
on TJ.
back from our brief recess, or our break anyway, and we're going to continue on with the status update of our capital improvement program.
Okay, good evening again, Mayor and Council. What I'd like to talk to you about tonight is our capital improvement program. Both, this will be two parts. One is this current fiscal year, which is in the budget. We've been building, designing projects. And then look longer term at the 5-year capital improvement program in the next 4 years of what our revenues look like, what our potential expenditures based on our current program, and where would we like to go with that. A lot of slides, a lot of pictures. I hope this doesn't look like, look at my vacation pictures, so I'll try to go quickly.
Vacation in Yountville?
Right. So the recommend, let's see. So essentially the capital improvement program, as you know, but for the public who's watching isn't familiar with what a capital improvement program is or does, essentially it's our planning guide. We essentially create the plan and then work through the plan the work the plan is what they say. It's a management tool. We look at resources. We leverage available resources, which could be grants that we just talked about. And really the bottom line is protect, preserve, enhance, extend the life of, improve the town's infrastructure. And we'll go through and look at what those are. On our current fiscal year, there's 36 projects. The current budget is $2.4 million. Some of that is to essentially put into a reserve for future projects, so we're not spending all that this year. There are 14 funding sources. That gets into gas tax revenue and other grants from other sources. And then this is one of the core functions of the Public Works Department, so we take this very seriously and spend a lot of time on this. As of January, there are 13 projects that have been completed, 6 projects under construction, 13 projects are in design, and 4 are essentially on hold. That could also be because we're setting aside money for future projects. There's these categories. The capital improvement program has been around since around 1993 or 5. Set up these categories. Civic facilities are essentially buildings. Community projects is sort of special projects that could be in several areas. Drainage and flood control, parks and recreation, streets, which is mostly gas tax. Wastewater is our collection system, our treatment, and our recycled water system, and then water is our distribution. In terms of civic facilities, we've set up the town facility renovation. This is projects that essentially miscellaneous projects, the generations rooms, putting on a new wall covering there, soundproofing in town hall offices, and we've pretty much spent the $26,000. There was a budget adjustment the council just approved at the last council meeting. The audiovisual equipment project, that's complete. We're using it right now, and there's a balance in that project of $4,000. And that brings up, many people in the department and other departments work on that. For example, Michelle was working on the audio-visual. The wastewater treatment plant operators work on their projects. We have consultants on other projects. This was in the, it's called fiber reinforced plastic, was being put on the walls in the generations room at Community Center. So this is a harder surface, won't be. This room has many uses, whether it's for dining at the crab feed or playing basketball. So we wanted a more sturdy surface on these walls. It's a little hard to see, but these are acoustical panels that were put up in the offices in the Public Works and Planning Department. When we did the renovations, this was left open, so now this has really attenuated the sound and really dampened it, and it's a lot better in there now. Civic facilities, we also have the equipment replacement fund. This is one of those funds where we put money aside each year, try to build it up, and over time we'll have a savings account to purchase big ticket items like solar panels that need to be replaced and stuff like that. But we also do some small projects. We did our energy efficiency conservation project and replaced a bunch of heating air conditioning units, but there's still one old one over at the post office that we want to replace. But again, we're building a balance there of $30,000, and when we do the 5-year capital improvement program, you'll see money set aside each year. The town hall seismic retrofit, this is just $70,000 right now. This will be a much larger project in the future that we'll talk about in our second part of the presentation. But right now, the council has approved $70,000 to begin the preliminary design and study work. On the right is the old air conditioning unit, and on the left is the new one, so we want to replace that. We've really saved a lot of money on the energy efficiency work, about $20,000 a year, which is, the payments are only $10,000 a year, so it's really, town's coming out ahead. It's a little hard to see, but this is up above us in the town hall. These are essentially hollow bricks. They're mortared together. We have a wood frame, so the current plan is to essentially build a wooden frame along the walls, and then also to put sheets of plywood on the roof, and then put the tiles back on. So that would strengthen the building. It was built in the 1920s. Doesn't meet the current codes and standards. Community projects. These are the special projects that cover many areas. Americans with Disabilities Act, accessibility improvements. At Veterans Memorial Park, we built a new path from the crosswalk. At the realignment of Champaign into the park where the bocce ball courts are. The new podium that people have been using, and then the door opener at the library. Just one of those projects that did not get included in the community center project, and so that was installed. This is what the near the bocce courts, south end of Veterans Memorial Park, looked like after a rainstorm, and then this is the new concrete there, and there will be an ADA accessible picnic table on this concrete, which is there now but not in this picture. This is the door opener at the library. It has you see the blue and the button and all, so that was a nice installation. What's also interesting about this is it's somewhat powered by people opening the door. It actually charges the batteries, and then so it doesn't use as much electricity. So, other community projects are vehicle and major equipment replacement program. Here we'd like to put money aside and create a vehicle replacement program, but we spent the money on new equipment, a truck and a tractor. I'll have pictures of that. Other community projects are undergrounding, like the North Washington Utility Undergrounding Project, that was done with Hotel Luca. It's mostly complete. We're still waiting for Comcast, which is almost done, in AT&T, which the utility companies are not moving very quickly, and it's very frustrating. This is the old 1988 tractor, and this is the new skid steer. So it's a better, more useful piece of equipment. You get attachments. So we're happy to get the new, more versatile equipment. This is also used to sweep the new bike path along Highway 29 and the Hopper Creek path. This is the undergrounding up on North Washington. The power poles and wires on the west side of the street have been removed. We're just waiting to remove the wires on the east side of the street. And this is a cost share with the developers of several properties here, so it's not all town funded, but there were impact fees that were paid by developers and in-kind contributions. The tree, curb, gutter, sidewalk replacement program, this has been going on for years. We go around town and we replace sidewalks that are uplifted. We have a lot of pedestrians in town, and so we want to reduce our liability on those. For example, in front of Whistle Stop, this is the west side of Washington, just north of Mulberry, across from the post office. And these big trees were lifting up the sidewalks. You can see where we've been grinding it down, but you can only grind so much until you just have to replace the sidewalk. And so here they are putting in new concrete sidewalks, and then new trees have also been placed there. Moving over to drainage and flood control, the Bear Ditch Bank Repair Project was completed this year, and also we did some hydraulic studies, which was brought to you earlier, looking at alternatives for what to build in the future. When the pumps are running at the flood wall down at the mobile home parks, they're discharging water, or during a flood, it's a lot higher amount, but this water shoots across the Bear Ditch and then erodes the bank on the other side. So to mitigate that and reduce the erosion to the Vineyard Maintenance Road, large rocks were brought in there to stabilize the bank there. This is the culvert upstream of Highway 29 and the railroad. As part of the study for the hydrology, we're looking at putting a flow restrictor on this pipeline, which would help reduce the flooding on Hopper Creek. Also building, potentially, if we can acquire the land and rights or easements, to build a detention basin here, and that would also attenuate some of the flow coming into town and reduce flooding. And this is one of 5 alternatives that were brought to you that we'll be looking at. So we'll be applying for those funding in the future from the Flood Control District with Measure A money. Another drainage project is the townwide drainage. We're looking at some work on Yount Mill Road, but now we're looking at cooperating with a development project with the Napa Valley Lodge to replace a storm drain on Washington Street. So when they move forward, we'll have a 50-50 contribution to that. Stormwater management is another regulatory requirement. We're putting money aside for potential projects in the future. And then the Hopper Creek sediment removal, every other year. We'll do a large project, but every year the California Conservation comes in and does some sediment removal at the bridges. So this has been funded by the Watershed Assessment District. So here's the last time we did a major removal of sediment in Hopper Creek. This is by the pedestrian bridge between Oakleaf Court and Heather. And I think they removed about 150 to 200 cubic yards, which is about 20 dump trucks. Parks and recreation, the park improvements, the new lights were put in at the bocce ball courts, and then we're also doing some improvements, some new landscaping up at Yountville Community Park and the drainage near the restrooms, and then also the Park Paths program, which is under construction right now. So it's a little hard to see, but there's new lights here at the bocce ball courts that people can now play later into the evening, and there's still the low lights, the LED lights at the bottom, but this has lit up the bocce courts pretty well, so we anticipate there could be more usage and more rentals. This is looking from Oak Circle at Vineyard Park towards Holly Street. This is the old asphalt concrete path, which the tree was uplifting and that's cracking and falling apart, so it needed to be replaced. Council did a budget adjustment, put in 3 years worth of funding to replace this path and others in Veterans Memorial Park. And so this is when they were constructing that. It's wider, it's concrete, it's going to last longer. And it's also colored concrete, which is more attractive, and also realigned away from the trees, so that the picnic area will be rearranged. Swimming pool improvements. This is building up some reserve that did some painting last year. We'll have some pumps and filters replaced in the future. Again, this is a project that we need to put a savings account reserve for future replacement of equipment. Tennis court resurfacing has been awarded. We're waiting for a week of good weather. We need some 70-degree weather for a week, and then we can have the contractor go out there and put down the new surfacing. Park equipment, we've built new parks equipment. Regulations changed, and so that needs to be replaced. We've also looked at for the future, the umbrellas there at the pool. There's other things, the concrete, if it's cracking, things like that. We did there was the water leak, and that was paid for out of this project. This is one of the cracks at the tennis court, and so we'll get that repaired and bridged over with the new project. Moving over to streets and transportation, we have a pavement management program, which we've had for years, and looks at overlay projects so that our measure is the pavement condition index, and the town is doing well with our pavement condition index now because the town has been investing and putting money into the streets. The other part of that is slurry seal, which is more of a maintenance, and this extends the life of the pavement so we don't have to do as many expensive overlays. And that project is complete in Washington Square on Mesa Court. Traffic calming, there's been several projects around town that have been built. The one this year was east of the community center on Mulberry. This is Mulberry looking east. The post office is on the left, and this is a project we want to do an overlay. The street is just so cracked that we can't just do a slurry seal anymore. We need to actually do an overlay on this street. This was a slurry seal. This was on Jasmine. So this is when they slurry sealed the street and the shoulders in this neighborhood, and that turned out quite well. These are the bulb outs on Mulberry, so just east of the community center. And so the idea here is to essentially break up the commercial area from the residential area. It slows down the traffic. People feel like they're being a narrowing of the road, so it's supposed to give them a sense of confinement and slowing them down. So we'll see how that works. The streetlight replacement program was a large project this year. It was completed with a balance of $45,000. That was on Washington Street, Yount Street, Fennell, and some lights on Oak Circle. North Yountville Bike Route project is in design. That's to build a path into Yountville Community Park and some restriping. And then also the restriping on Madison, Yount, Solano, and Yountville Crossroads. Just every few years we need to go out and restripe these streets. This picture shows the two street lights, the old lights, which were the concrete, had the gas lamp on the top. Light, it was high pressure sodium, less efficient, 50 watts. And then the new lights it's the black light. It has LED, and it's about 50 watts. So significant savings on electricity costs. This project was not part of our energy efficiency project, but actually town funded to replace these street lights on Washington Street. This is what it looks like at night. With the LED lights, it's a whiter light than the orange light that was on the old lights. This is the alignment of the path at Yountville Community Park. On the left is the Nap Valley Lodge, Washington Street. To the right is the park and the picnic benches and all. So the path will meander in through the park and then along the drainage over towards the restrooms. So it'll be a concrete path, colored concrete, ADA accessible. So essentially we would have an ADA accessible path all the way from Yountville Community Park to the Veterans Home and the other direction as well. In terms of water distribution, we don't treat the water, but we distribute it to our customers. We have water meters and transmitters, which we do remote read. It takes about 3 hours to drive around town, and they read all the meters instead of the old method of reading all the meters by hand, which took days. So what we've been doing is going around town and replacing the meters, but not the transmitters. Some transmitters when they break, but they've been doing pretty well. About 250 meters this year, which was good. I think we're up to about half the town over the last 2 years, because these just start to slow down and don't read correctly. The water service lateral replacement project is complete. That was about to balance about $5,000, and then the pipes and blow-off project is complete. Here they are trying to. This is what's called a mole. So they were driving this underneath the roadway, so they didn't have to dig up the street, and then they're pulling the copper pipe through under the street to the new meter. These are the new meters here, and then the meter boxes, and then there will be a transmitter attached to these so that we can drive by and pick up the readings. If you ever want to know what a blow-off valve looks like, this is what he's installing here, and this is used at the end of a pipeline on a dead-end street like a cul-de-sac. The valve is turned here, it lets the water out, and essentially we clean out the dirty water that's been sitting there for 6 months to a year, to have fresh water in there with a chlorine. The other projects is the hydrant and main flushing. This project, we're looking at putting this on hold for a year until we finish our pressure regulator pit upgrades, put some sand traps in there. This is when the crew was out on, this is Madison and Jefferson. We have a lot of sand in the system that came over from the Veterans Home and their treatment plant. And so every once in a while, if we get a sand complaint, then they'll need to open up the fire hydrant and then just flush the water and the sand out into the street. You can see the brown here is just the sand that comes out. The problem also is when there's sand in the system, it gets into the meters and they stop reading or they start slowing down. So we're not getting the true sales or cost of water that's being sold.
People don't tend to call us when that happens.
Yeah. The inflow and infiltration, we're moving now over to wastewater, our collection system, our treatment, and our recycled water. Our inflow and infiltration program is partially complete. We do smoke testing and videos and spot repairs at our sewer pipes. At the joint treatment plant, we have equipment replacement program. This is partially complete, going through, and the plant's been there since 1939 and upgraded in 77, and these things break and need to be replaced or become more efficient. This is smoke testing, where the smoke is put into the sewer line, and we look for places where the water from the rain might be getting into the sewer system, and we don't want to treat clean water. Sometimes you'll see smoke coming out of somebody's yard where the water is getting into the lateral, and so we want to repair those pipelines so that they're not leaking in. This is at the treatment plant. Some of you had the tour there. These are the final tanks. This is where the water's almost finished the treatment process, and this is where the water's pumped out of the final sedimentation tanks into the chlorine contact chamber, which was the $1 million project that we built, and the fuzzy filter. And so with the project was replacing these old pumps, and now they're in this vault. It's more energy efficient, and it's also been expanded for future expansion if we need it. And again, here's the chlorine contact chamber, which essentially creates tertiary treated water, which can be used in more uses. We also did the slurry seal at the treatment plant, as when we were doing the slurry seal at Washington Park, and we're also working on the methane capture project. We have a meeting coming up next week to essentially take the gas that's created in the digester at the treatment plant and put that back into the heater, which would reduce the amount of gas that we need to purchase from PG&E, and PG&E actually paid us $20,000 as part of this project. So this is what the treatment plant looked like after the slurry seal. It's nice, dark black. This is the primary trickling filter, the digester in the back here where we're doing the methane capture, and then the chlorine contact chamber and the final tanks are over in this area. Main and lateral replacement program, we're building up a project. These, are usually around $100,000. We asked for $60,000 this year, probably another $60,000 next year, and then we can start to do replacement of some old pipelines. We like to do these every other year just to have some economies of scale, similar to the overlay projects, which we don't do every year. The recycled water project we've talked about quite a bit tonight. The current budget for this year is $400,000. That's for the feasibility study and the surveying and design, and get the permits and things like that. Environmental document. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this is the Silverado Trail looking southeast. This is a Ragusi winery, and there's a 50-acre-foot pond here on the east side of Silverado Trail, and this is the largest storage pond in the system. So, changing gears to looking at the future, the next 5 years or 4 years in the 5-year program for fiscal year 12 through 16, we want to. In your packet is the summary sheet from each of these categories. It lays out how much money we like to spend each year in the 5 years. We also have a spreadsheet that shows how much revenue and expenditures and balance there is. So again, this is a long-range management tool. If we're going to do a $3 million recycled water project, we need to go out and find the grants or the financing to leverage those funds. Civic facilities, our replacement expansion of our buildings, equipment replacement fund, the seismic retrofit, where that's going to go. We're going to have the park restroom project, the community center trash enclosure is on the list. With the new community center, everything's new now. The solar panels, the geothermal, the air conditioning, but those things will all get old, and we want to put money aside for when they need to be replaced or fixed in 20 years to have the funding. This is the park restroom at Yountville Community Park, one of several that we'll need to do more than just maintenance. At some point, we'll have to do major upgrades. Town Hall and our seismic retrofit project. Our community projects, accessibility improvements, undergrounding, tree, curb, gutter, sidewalk improvements, vehicle replacement, parking lot. So we're always looking at these areas to essentially fund these probably longer term. Look at the full cost of all of our fleet and how much are we putting aside each year, because some pieces of equipment cost more than others, like the $280,000 Vector truck that every 10 to 15 years we'll need to replace. We in the future projects are emergency operations center upgrades. Currently we work out of the fire station, but that may not be the best location, so we may do some improvements at Community Hall. Veteran Memorial Park parking improvements. South of the park, there's a gravel area. We may want to pave that. Photovoltaic systems. If we use renewable energy, can that save us some money? Geographical information system for asset management. Looking what do we have and how much money should we be putting aside? What sort of maintenance should we be doing to get the most money? This is the next phase of the sidewalk replacement project. This is on west side of Washington Street between Mulberry and Yount. And again, these trees are still here. They're still pushing up the sidewalks. We're grinding, but eventually want to replace this, make it from 4 feet to 5 feet. This is a highly pedestrian area, corridor. Here's some undergrounding that people would like to see. This is on Mulberry, looking down Heather towards Larkspur. And so this is just one pocket of town that just hasn't had their overhead electric wires and cable TV and telephone put into conduits under the ground. And there's several areas, so we want to talk to you about what are the priorities there. In terms of drainage and flood control, we have about $2 million from the Measure A. We've got some recommendations from the study. We're also looking at some restoration along the Hopper Creek, which could both be mitigation and restoration. And then reduction of pollutants going into the storm drain systems. Sediment removal is an ongoing project every year. Stream restoration. We're looking at Hopper Creek at Washington Street, putting a storm drain pipe there. Also some storm drains along the bike path. Fennell Road Culvert was one of the projects in the study. Oak Circle Culvert. Lower the pedestrian path at Heather. Washington Street drainage from Padrone to Hopper Creek. This is Oak Circle at Hopper Creek. Heather's over here, and there's just all this debris accumulating up against the bridge. So, are there, can we do a pipeline that would go down Oak Circle and relieve some of this flooding before it starts flooding the street? The town has 13 parks, over 10 acres, so that's a lot of maintenance, and we'll need to do some work there. We have equipment maintenance as well, paths to construct and maintain. So we have the park improvement program for like equipment replacement program, the pool, park paths. These are all infrastructure that we need to maintain, eventually replace. Park development. Are there any new parks that we want to talk about? Do we want to replace the tennis courts at some time? The pedestrian paths from Oak Circle to Mission is a project we'll probably apply for a grant. That was in the bike plan, countywide bike plan. It's a missing link in our system. Here's the equipment's all nice and new now, but eventually we'll need to replace some of this equipment. So we want to put money aside for that. The pool, again, we've discussed that. Streets, there's 8 miles of streets, 224 street lights, 7 miles of walking paths. So all this needs to be maintained and replaced eventually. So we have a street resurfacing program, our slurry seal program, our traffic calming program, and our street light replacement program. We're looking at replacing railroad tie curbs and asphalt concrete sidewalks with concrete. We also want to look at some surveying this is good. Get more into the details if you want, but traffic circulation plan update. We have one. It's getting a little bit old. May want to look at that. A barrier replacement project. A lot of the barriers. The one was replaced on Fennell. Probably need to look at the other crossings on Hopper Creek. Sidewalk on Washington south of Champaign. Is that a project in the future, or do we wait for development to come in? regrade and pave Weber west of Washington. I have a picture of that for you. So here's a spot. This is in front of Town Hall and the school at where Yount and Humboldt. So we could put in bulb outs here as we're done down at Weber, and that would slow down the traffic and hopefully make it a more safe area. This is one of the barrier rails. This is on Jefferson at Hopper Creek. There's not a lot here to keep a truck from going into the creek, so we're looking at replacing that. This is Washington and Weber. Vintage Inn is behind, and the Keller Gardens are here to the right. And it's a bad drainage area. It just fills up ponds here during rainstorms. So we're looking at alternatives for how can we build a pipeline to relieve this from ponding. Doesn't cause structural flooding, but it's a nuisance. Water distribution, we have our mains and laterals. Every year they get a year older. We have 800 water services, 65 fire hydrants, and numerous valves and regular pits. So we want to look at replacement programs for those. Doing a fire flow study, I think we're okay there, but we may look at that. Our groundwater management plan, this is another regulation that is required. We want to avoid this kind of situation. It was on Landy where the water line broke and it was shooting water over the house. So we want to replace our pipes before this happens because it's a lot more expensive to replace this pipe after it's broken than before. This is the regulator pit, or one of the two regulator pits, and this is where the water comes from the Veterans Home into the town's distribution system, and we want to do some upgrades here. Also comply with the California Department of Public Health. In terms of wastewater and water reclamation, we have our collection system, our pump station, our joint treatment plant, our recycled water system, 600 residential customers, 76 commercial customers, a lot of mains and laterals that we want to take care of. Inflow and filtration I touched on, the main and lateral replacements, joint treatment plant equipment replacement, pump station, SCADA system for remotely monitoring. This will be part of the recycled water project. And then also do want to dredge our wastewater ponds to provide more storage there. We have some old equipment in our pump station that needs to be upgraded eventually or replaced. A lot of equipment at the wastewater treatment plant, pumps, motors, things like that. This is the pond, effluent pond. We could, dredge this out, create some more storage here. So now getting to the dollars and cents, the capital projects fund is Fund 50, and that essentially is our general fund money. That goes to community facilities, or civic facilities, community projects, parks, some street projects. Currently, in the 5-year capital improvement program budget, we're proposing $2.2 million. With the budget adjustment at the last council meeting for $500,000, the current funding is $2.1 million, so we're really in a deficit of only $100,000. So when you look at the summary sheet for this, for these categories, that's pretty much funded. Now, that being said, there's some qualifiers. This does not include the seismic retrofit of this building, which we're estimating could be $2 million. So we would need to look at that as a new project. It's currently shown as a future project, and then we would come to the council with financing. And so as part of our capital improvement program budget, we would look at that. Another future project that's not funded is our $8 million of utility undergrounding. So currently that is not shown in our 5-year CIP, but in the future. And then also the path from Oak Circle to Mission. We probably would not propose that to the council unless we got grant funding. But those are out there, and we want to present these to you in case you would like to give these a higher priority or something else a lower priority. In terms of drainage and flood control, based on the study that was prepared, there's about $2.8 million in projects. The funding available from Measure A currently is estimated at $2.1 million, so we're about a deficit of $700,000. This does not include the drainage along east side of Washington Street from Padrone to Hopper Creek. So to add that in there, then we'd be more in a deficit. To take a project off the list would reduce the deficit. So we just wanted to talk to you about, what are the alternatives out there. Fund 20 is our gas tax revenue. Gas tax over 5 years is about $500,000. So there's a very great deficit. There's been discussions about a half-cent sales tax, and that would help to reduce this. We have about $2.5 million in need, and this doesn't even include the full To get to a pavement condition index of 75 would need about $600,000 in addition to this, just to get the streets into a better condition so they're somewhat more manageable and to be cost effective for the maintenance. So this is just to keep the streets at their current level of maintenance. The water fund is Fund 60. We're proposing about $570,000 for projects, water line replacements and all. The current funding based on the current rate structure is about $240,000. If the cost of to purchase water from the Veterans Home goes down, then that would have more funding available for these projects. So we'll keep track of that, but again, we have to project something. It does not include the full cost of all the replacements that we think based on a replacement schedule. That would be an additional $800,000, but this is essentially hitting those high priorities. Whoops. Wastewater, we have two funds for wastewater. One is the collection system, which is 100% town funded by the ratepayers, and then there's the wastewater treatment plant, which is 50-50 with the Veterans Home and the ratepayers. Currently in the proposed 5-year capital improvement program, we're recommending $4 million worth of work, but there's essentially based on the current rates and revenue from the Veterans Home about $2.4 million. Does not include another $600,000 in recommended pipe replacements. And then there are several funding sources, and we are looking at, assumption that there'd be some grants for the recycled water project. But, we looked at 4 alternatives for the recycled water project, so depending on the cost of that will affect this expense. So in conclusion, the purpose of our capital improvement program is to maintain safe and attractive buildings, maintain the equipment in good working order. It's a lot less expensive to replace it before it's broken. To schedule vehicle replacements, to essentially plan those out. Utility undergrounding to provide more reliable service. It's also more attractive. Comply with accessibility requirements, Americans with Disability Act. We want to have improvements to flood control, reduce flooding in the streets. Comply with stormwater regulations. We want to have safer, more attractive parks and recreation facilities. Improve pedestrian, bicycle, vehicle access throughout town, improve our pavement management, streetlight upgrades, and then reduce long-term costs for pavement management, and then traffic calming and bridge safety were 2 others. We also want to comply with our water regulations from the California Department of Public Health, reduce our emergency repair costs through ongoing maintenance of water mains and laterals, comply with the wastewater regulations from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and then provide reclaimed water to the to more customers, as if we could add on new customers, or dispose of more of that during the winter. So tonight what we're asking for is to discuss the capital improvement program over the 5 years, take any public comments, and then to prioritize those projects and provide direction to staff on the 5-year capital improvement program. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. So it's really about reviewing and potentially adjusting the plan that's in place.
Correct.
There may be no adjustment that we deem necessary at this point. There might be some tweaks that people want to recommend.
Well, I think that's correct, Mayor. What we also really want to do is we've showcased for you the current 5-year plan. What we really want is if there are some projects that you want to highlight a little more, we need to know that so we can kind of work on shaping the budget. We also tried to break out the fact that we have multiple funding sources, and as you saw, some of these we have some capacity. The good news, as was alluded to, is the capital projects fund balance is improving, and I anticipate that will continue to be the case next year, where we'll be able to allocate a similar amount. Some of these are restricted funding sources. For example, we have Measure A funding that can go towards a lot of our flood mitigation projects, but that money can't go someplace else. So when we talk about our prioritization, really I think there's several things that we want to do. One, it's an education. I think we want to take a look and realize how much, I hear people say, it's a little town, there's not much going on here. What is there to do? Well, you just saw an overview of what this year's capital project and the amount of stuff, and you've seen an outline of where we're going 5 years. So Graham and I are hoping that, one, we need some confirmation that these are, you're reasonably comfortable that these are the right projects. We can refine them. we've heard previously from the council that you would like us to make the seismic retrofit, especially a alternative project, a higher priority. So we're working on trying to get real numbers for you on that. But also, we just kind of want to know so that we can build our work plan going forward. Are we generally on the right path, so to speak? Are there some things that you'd like us to review or provide a little more guidance on when we bring this back to you later in the budget year for more formal evaluation? And what we are really trying to do is understand the going forward cost of our programs, because I think our focus has historically been on the current year, not doing the analysis as Graham has done, where he shows you we don't have enough money in some of these funds to do the things that we projected in that account. So we do need to prioritize and move some things.
Well, and that's one of the 2 points I want to make before we have our discussion. One is, these are not all projects that are on the work schedule per se. We're doing them, as you stated in your report, as funding is available. I know this council has mentioned wanting to see the cost covered. Where is the money going to be coming from for what we're seeing in the immediate future, at least, if not through the entire CIP. So if somebody's reading this long list, it's a very extensive list. It doesn't mean that we have committed to every single thing that's on this list, and we're still working toward, like you're saying, prioritizing, scheduling, and that was the other point I was going to make. Some of what you have scheduled is with very good reason, whether it be certain things are coming to the end of their lifespan in terms of infrastructure, or if you're matching things up with funding sources or with other projects that are having impact. So this isn't just a haphazard list of projects that we've thrown up on a wall and decide what we like best to get to.
That's correct, and I would also say that we probably, on some of those, there are some discretion, and this is where we'd like some feedback, and if there are some street segments, repair, is there a higher priority so that it may take 2 years? One thing you bring up, a good example, utility undergrounding has a big ticket price, over $8 million, and that price is probably growing, but we've exhausted our fund balance on that now. In fact, you drew down into that, so we have really a zero balance there. So going forward, until we replenish that fund or have more impact fees, the likelihood of us doing significant utility undergrounding are limited unless they're, the council's policy direction to staff has been, if there is private development to tag onto and there's a reasonable economy of scale, again, coming back to the theme, cost effectiveness, then we might revisit that. But right now, from that standpoint, after our several projects, you're not going to see probably in the next couple of years, staff recommend utility undergrounding that we're the lead on until that fund balance builds back.
Right. Because this is a bit of a workshop and more of a dialogue than one of our normal hearings, I'm going to invite now, if our member of the public or members of the public would like to comment on any part of this. If in our discussion a question or a comment comes up, feel free. I'll re-invite you at the end of our discussion. And the Vice Mayor, as he often does, will remind me that I just made that commitment. But with that, I think we can kind of merge our questions that we normally make of staff before discussion with our actual discussion. So I'll start with Councilmember Hall.
Yep, thank you, and thanks, Graham, for putting together a very comprehensive package. Question, first of all, I don't know if this is really one directed to you or Kathleen with regards to your attachment A or attachment 1, specifically where you have balances and projects that are completed. Am I to understand then that those are fund balances that actually exist as funds available to be expended elsewhere, or is that just saying that we didn't spend what we had anticipated spending?
It is a fund balance, but the funding source is needs to go back. Usually goes back to that source. So if it was funded out of the gas tax, it would go back. The balance would go back to the gas tax.
Okay, which is my next question, and that goes to your third attachment, which basically shows the difference between the funding source and the anticipated expenditure for the next 5 years. Is it that? Are those completed, if you will, remaining balances incorporated into your available funding source? Or is this money now, let's just take one example, the civic facility renovations of $15,000, is that going to come back in as a future funding amount for those projects?
So the attachment 3, the table of the expenditure plan, is essentially looking at the 5-year capital improvement program, what was in this year and the next 4 years of what we anticipated to spend, and then what we anticipated as revenue. So it doesn't take into account what we did or didn't do this year.
Under budget or over
Right.
budget?
It just says this fiscal year we budgeted, $2.4 million. We may have spent half of it, but we're just saying that's part of the whole $2.1 million funding in this category.
Okay. I'll take that as a yes. All right. Kathleen's affirming. Okay. Well, then specifically, it's an exhaustive list, and I mean, I think directionally it's correct. I would point out that the town hall seismic retrofit, which is this under civic facilities attachment 2, I think you said it was $2 million. Unless my eyes are deceiving me, I see 7. I know that's gone back and forth.
Right. In the current 5-year capital improvement program, the 7 is based on a study that was done earlier of doing everything.
Okay.
What we're looking at now is, can we do a smaller project without doing the optimization of facilities and space utilization, things like that. So essentially, what can we do with just building the frame and redoing the roof?
Right.
And we're hoping this around $2 million. Now, we don't have the numbers yet, but because we're still in the preliminary study phase. But we're hoping that this is about the area, and that's also about the level of our financing ability. So that sort of plays into it as well. We can't build a project for $7 million because we can't get the financing.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, and so I would just say, without going through the entire list, directionally everything seems correct to me. I think the undergrounding is nice and it's fantastic, and we all benefit from it. It's just it's very expensive. I think in the areas where there's heavy traffic, it's certainly benefited those individuals and primarily probably the business community, because I think it was done mostly on Washington at this point in time. But those are just expenditures that there's been a lot of talk around how to fund, and I'm not necessarily sure that since it's an unfunded item for an estimate of $8 million, that it's something we're going to be chomping at the bit to go after. But in general, this is good because it gives all of us an idea of what we're looking at and how we plan on proposing funding that going forward, and it's helpful to see what sort of the key items are in the town. And Steve, as you indicated, there are a lot of little infrastructure activities that occur in the community, even a town of this size, and it's important that we keep it on the list front and center so that people have the ability to review it. And I find that the list is helpful and kind of gives me a sense of where we're going. I don't have anything to really add or subtract from it, other than, I don't know, we're going to come up with the additional $5 million, which is the difference that I came up with in your funded versus your expenditures. And that's just going to be ultimately through prioritizing or reprioritizing what we have. But I don't know that I'm ready today to say, put a stake in the ground.
And we're not
on something.
necessarily asking
I
you.
recognize
Part of
that.
this is you will get the updated CIP again as part of the budget. We're just wanting to know if there's some additional projects or something that we're maybe moving, we had in year 4 or 5 that you want to say, hey, no, we've lived with Madison long enough, or no, utility undergrounding, you must find way to do more. Because, for example, several of you saw an earlier presentation a couple of years back. There are some alternatives to utility undergrounding if we really wanted to make that a priority. The town's approach generally has been we pay for it and the developer in a mitigation, but the most common approach actually is a property owner assessment where they pay to have, obviously. So there, if that was something that you felt was really strong, then we would go spend some staff time and energy looking at alternative revenue streams and how do we do that? Just like you asked us, is there something different for town hall that we could do short of $7 million? And that's what we're trying to find out.
Right.
And just to follow on that, we will be coming back based on our discussion tonight and recommendations and input from the staff and the public. Is a 1-year capital improvement program budget, and if we don't have money in the in these funding sources, then we would defer a project to a later year or something just to stay within the budget. But we'll have to prioritize, but we want to get your input on how to prioritize.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll have additional discussion about that when we are meeting in May with our budget workshops.
So this is sort of a preliminary to that whole activity.
Yes.
I guess one question I have, which is a general scope, if you will, if you take the total estimate of what we've got in the 5-year numbers, it's like 12.1 is what I've come up with. So on average, not that there's such a thing, it's like $2.4 million in capital needs, funded or unfunded, regardless of the gap, per year. Does that number, I mean, for a municipality of this size with the facilities and the level of service or service that we provide, basically, does that seem right? I mean, I don't know. I don't have a benchmark to compare it against.
Well, I think there's several ways to answer that question, Councilmember Hall. One, it depends on the infrastructure and the facilities and the services that are delivered by the community. So in some cases, I would say we may be a little bit more robust than some communities our size, but that's also what the service level and what the commitments have been made to the community. For example, that bulb out that we did on Mulberry, probably one could argue didn't have to be done, but that was the community commitment that the council made previously to the residents of that neighborhood, and we've been fortunate in being able to honor those commitments in prioritization. I think when we look at one thing we have to overcome, and I think you've identified it, we have a deficit if you look at our overall capital infrastructure financing. And that's what I wanted people in the community to realize is we don't have the money to do everything on this list. We're significantly close, but we're not. And also there's a myth that we have tons of money. We don't. We're a well-run organization. We have a stable financial capacity. But if we're going to do all those things that are on that capital infrastructure list in that 5-year, we do need to be putting more money into our capital projects fund and raising revenue in a few other areas to get everything on that list. And as Public Works Director has identified, a major focus of ours has been making sure that we're doing the forward planning for the future councils and staff 5, 10, 15, and 20 years so that all those things we're putting in now, we've got a planning mechanism in place so that hopefully the funding structure will be there or reasonably close for those future councils and staff to deal with it, and we're not starting from ground zero, which is where do we come up with the money? We need, $3.6 million to do a seismic retrofit for Town Hall because we've done a more comprehensive planning of what we're adding. That's why you're seeing us say, all right, it may only be $20,000 a year, but we want to put a sinking reserve because we can build up that capacity over no purchases for a couple of years, then you have money built up to address a purchase several years down the road. So you're kind of seeing a change in philosophy a little bit as we take greater ownership of the CIP process.
I'd also like to add that one of the advantages of the capital improvement program in terms of planning tools is for the water and wastewater rates. And so when we set the last water wastewater rates, it was based on the capital improvement program at the time. Mm-hmm. So by doing more assessments and understanding what we have, what we need to do, then it'll be a more accurate number going into the next rate study in a couple of years.
And that was my only other comment. I mean, with regards to prioritization, to the extent that we have the ability to do cost recovery and infrastructure fund development through the payor, not necessarily the town or other external funding outside of the payor. We should try to capitalize on that where we possibly can. I know we've done that, and that was sort of a critical component of our process last year in having to go through and change water rates. So I would just assume that where we have that option, undergrounding isn't necessarily one, Steve, that I would go back to the residents and ask them all to pony up their money to put their utilities underground, because the people that already have it underground don't have to pony up money, and it would be an undue burden, in my opinion, for individuals to have to do that. So that being said, I think that the directionally the list gives us a good sense of where we're at. I don't have anything that jumps out and says this is not what we should be doing. I'd like to figure out if there are other opportunities for funding, or if there are the options or opportunities to fund those projects where we have a gap, third party or otherwise. We should consider that. But certainly with the wastewater or the water, where we have the ability with the direct payors, including the people at this dais, to support that process, we should be looking to those opportunities.
Councilmember Mueller.
I have a couple questions. I'll start with the easy ones, I think, first. You talked about the upstream restrictor on Hopper Creek. Mm-hmm. If you do that, it's my understanding that that will actually decrease the amount of sediment because that kind of rushes in and deposits. And if we restrict it, will that flow in or stay upstream? Will that, so if we actually put the cost into for the restrictor on Hopper Creek, will we decrease the sediment removal costs? Those are only $10,000, so they're not a big number, but do you know?
Well, the sediment transport is, Angie Dodd, who came and spoke to us, she did her PhD on that, so there isn't a simple answer to that. But one of the things we've talked about, and I just sort of glossed over it, is to build a detention basin, essentially a sump or a sink or essentially a big hole to catch sediment as well before it gets to the highway. So not only would there be a stricter plate to keep the amount of water coming under the highway, but also there'd be a place for the sediment to be deposited, because a lot of the sediment is coming from the hills and vineyards upstream of town. And so if we can capture that before it gets into town, then that helps. But sediment has to do with how steep is the creek, and is it eroding on the banks, is it meandering, and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. So it's sediment will still come into town, but we're hoping that by doing something like that, we can reduce the amount of the ongoing maintenance we have to do on Hopper Creek between Oak Circle and Mulberry. What happens at Oak Circle and Mulberry is that that's where the water slows down. When the water slows down, then the heavy sediment falls out of the water column, and that's where essentially gets deposited. And that's been historically happening year after year. And when we have very wet years, there's a lot more sediment. When we have dry years, there's not as much sediment. But on average, it's about every 2 years that we need to remove the sediment.
So over some fairly short period of time, that might pay for itself.
We were hoping that there'd be, that would be an advantage. The biggest advantage is to reduce the flooding on Oak Circle and Mulberry and those streets.
And all the ancillary stuff would be great.
Right.
The other question on streetlights. So there's on page 7 out of 10, can you clarify for me that there were some town streetlights that were retrofitted with LED bulbs, so you're not going to replace those until 2018. Now, which ones are those? Are they kind of sporadic throughout town, or?
The streetlights that were, say there's 200 and something streetlights in town, about 130 are town-owned and maintained. So all the town-owned and maintained streetlights have been either retrofitted with the LED bulb, or they've been replaced completely with a new street light. So what we're saying is, if we've retrofitted the light, we want to get our money out of that, because it takes 5 to 8 years to get the savings to pay for the work.
Right.
So we didn't really want to go out and just replace these lights if they were just retrofitted, because then we wouldn't get our money out of the project. Now we can, if the town council chooses and says, we really don't want to wait that long, we could go and replace those streetlights with the new standard. If a development comes along, then we will condition them to replace those streetlights. But just in the neighborhoods, we're recommending that we wait until we get our money out of those retrofits.
There's one other component on streetlights as well, which is the PG and own maintained. And the short answer for anybody, you can tell those because those are the yellowish light now. And we would need to negotiate with PG&E because it's really their responsibility to update and replace them. Now, eventually, at some point, we would probably propose, if they gave us a reasonable credit towards the replacement, we could take over and transition. But our plans right now don't address replacing the existing PG&E owned and maintained. So that's another component to our streetlight, because there are a few areas in our neighborhoods that have PG&E owned and maintained.
All right, then I'll get more specific now that I think I understand. So
about payback.
Yeah. Well, right now, the mid and to the south end of Washington, we have the new lights. They're incredible, and they're a dark sky, but they're very bright on the ground. It's just made a total difference in how that part of town looks at night. So if you're at Madison looking down, from the North Yountville down to that midsection, it's really, I hate to use the corny term night and day, but it's really night and day how the street lights look on the north end versus the south end. And in a short period of time, cross our fingers, the market's going to be open. We're going to have all the the new restaurant going into the North Town, Redwood is in
The
there
good news
now.
there, Councilmember Moeller, is the Hillstone development is required to put all new streetlights, which are the new model, on their frontage on Madison and Washington. So that part will get done this summer with their construction, their condition. So that will bring that component in, and that will bring the north end with the new street standards from Burgundy. Also, along Burgundy Commons, very shortly, where we just finished a sidewalk, there will be 4 new bollards going in to help light that. So you will see, I would imagine, within a year, you will see a significant change in the visual look of North Yountville or Noyo matching the south. And the south is a good example balancing, because that was a development condition placed on Hotel Yountville, and this is a development condition placed on both Hotel Luca and the now North Block, but when it was developed, it was Hotel Luca, and then the Hillstone development. So the private sector will be contributing to the project there, and then we've done the infill in between.
We're also talking with Michael Stewart, where McGrath's Garage is, and he may do some frontage improvements and sidewalks, and maybe put some streetlights on that side of the street as well, because they're mostly, all the streetlights are on the west side of the street of Washington there. So there are possibilities, but again, if that's something the council would like us to pursue, we can look at adding more streetlights on the east side of Washington.
Well, all I want to do, maybe we can talk about it in more detail when we actually go into the budget. So I'd like to see what the numbers are at budget time, because it is our commercial sector, and we're going to see some major changes coming to that north end of town. So, really to get the walking traffic up and down the whole street, especially, in the evening, it's more important in the wintertime than the summertime. I would like to see what those numbers are, just to see
Right, and I
when
just
we're
want
gonna
to point
do
out,
that.
that whole west side will be done as a condition. It's already scheduled, so that's
Right,
what I'm trying to say.
yeah.
If that's taken care of, if you wanted to highlight on the east end, that would be a new budget, and we can put some numbers together.
And I just want to see what those numbers are to make the north end of town look like the south end of town.
Right.
And so what are we talking versus the expectation for what we might get in increased retail, especially when we're going to see a lot more people on the street in the north end of town. So that'll be useful at budget time to kind of look at that.
And I think the other thing we've looked at a lot is not just the impact fees that go into these funds, but also when development comes in to
Right.
condition the developer. So
Right.
if the Thomas Keller Restaurant Group and the Gardens was ever to develop into a hotel, then that would be an opportunity to put in streetlights. But if the council doesn't want to wait, if that doesn't think that's going to happen, then we could also look at that stretch of Washington Street. We are looking at the project, where Vintage Inn is located on the west side of Washington Street between Humboldt and Weber. And so if we replace the curb gutter sidewalk, that would be the time to replace the streetlights as well. So that would get another stretch of new streetlights.
So I just want to see the numbers.
Okay.
So then I think that'll help maybe the discussion. And then the last part, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, back to the street funds. To me, that's probably our biggest deficit. And we just had that presentation, seemed like a few months ago, could have been
Yeah.
longer, about how it's, it's a real slippery slope, right now, generally the streets look pretty good, but, without a lot of money being spent, it's really not going to be there. And just something, maybe this is some more number crunching, back to the trash trucks. I've heard numbers anywhere from 25 to 40% of the deleterious effects on the streets are due to the trash trucks. We have, the way we're set up, 3 trucks go on every Monday, go up and down your street. So, just from a number point of view, without making any decisions, is there, something that we could do with trash rates that would have a very significant impact in this or not? There's no reason to even talk about that if it's only
Well,
going to contribute a few percent. So from a number viewpoint, I'd like to see that at budget time to have some more information.
Trucks do have a big impact. Other agencies have looked at their garbage rates to help fund part of the pavement maintenance, so that's
County
something.
does it.
Well, we're certainly paying attention to the discussion at the NCTPA level about a potential sales tax to deal specifically with road maintenance So that's something that we'll be learning the outcome within the next couple months to know if there may already be a solution to that issue.
Yeah, but
Or a potential solution. It's going to be based
Potential,
on going on the ballot in November. But did you have any other questions or
no,
comments?
those are the three major things I had.
Great.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dornbecker?
Thank you. I have a process question about setting the priorities and in two specific areas. For example, and forgive my naivete or not knowing this because I have not been through this process, but for example, on Mulberry Street, the process for the traffic calming, was that inspired by complaints from the residents who said that people were going too fast on Mulberry Street? Was there a public hearing on that? Was there,
Let me take that one and save Graham. And
I'll save that. for-
the
in
answer
parks,
was
I'll ask you.
the answer was yes, and this was about a 4-year process, Councilmember Dornbecker, and it also was born out of public hearings during the planning for the community center process. So a good education. We were about a year late in preferred delivery of the bulb out because of that initial bid not being one that the town could accept. So when we had to redo that. But yes, there was a very extensive amount of public input saying that this was an important concern for that segment. But like many areas in our community, what's important in one neighborhood doesn't necessarily generate interest in another neighborhood and vice versa.
I'd also like to, if I could just
Sure, please.
comment also, there are several plans around of different things, and one plan was there's an accessibility improvement transition plan. There's also a traffic study, and part of the traffic study with the Transportation Advisory Committee was to look at different alternatives with a consultant. And they did talk to the public. They came to the CDRB and the council, and they essentially created a list and priorities. And so a lot of those have been knocked off the list with past capital improvement programs, but there's still some projects on the list that we look at when we prepare the capital improvement program.
I see, so that was, and then I also have a question about the Park Paths program and Vineyard Park. I live close to it, and I have heard from other residents questioning, was there a process there as well? Because I was not aware of it, and I've lived in town for 12 years.
Again, the answer is yes, and there were a number of workshops and discussions at the Park and Community Services Commission, and that's part of our ever-struggling, how many times and where do people come through, and some people don't, all right, we're going to replace the paths. I don't know how many times we went through that. So the short answer is yes.
Okay. And then the $2.4 million per year in CIP funding, in our budgeting process, how does that get determined?
You approve the budget.
So whatever we allocate from the different funds.
Correct. And that's why we're starting this whole idea here is to try to start earlier with the education and awareness so that when we bring the proposed one-year CIP, which is what we always call the working year, and then the future rolling years, because we will always be updating it as a 5-year process. So those are very good questions, Councilmember Dornbecker. But yes, the ultimate funding decisions and prioritization are made by the council on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Another example I'll make in that regard is, if you'll remember last year, we were left in a situation where we chose to reduce certain projects to reduce the amount of expenses we were anticipating, and then we ended up being able to put back into place those very same projects as money that we anticipated to come in did in fact come in. So there is that flexibility, and that's why we spend many hours in meetings coming up to really kind of nail down on those details.
I'm just more concerned about the residents' input. But
It's always welcome, and we reach out on a constant basis, so hopefully people are paying attention before the machines and the staffs are out there doing the project. That's the challenge, is
that's the challenge.
when people aren't paying attention until they see the work happening, then they say, who decided this work? Well, we aren't making these things up by ourselves.
Correct, and I think that's a good point also for the mayor and council. Is oftentimes, some of these projects have been approved by the elected body anywhere from a year to 18 months previously, and by the time we go through the bid and construction, some people forget that, and then there are sometimes new people that come in and go, well, I wasn't aware of that, nobody consulted with me, and it's just...
That would be me.
Well,
I was
no,
the
I
new-
mean, it's a
the
lot
new
of
one.
people. It could be a new resident that moves onto a street, because I got a very insightful email from a resident on Mulberry that really liked the ball bouts, but wondered where the frig they came from, because they just all of a sudden, and he hadn't heard anything about it. And so it is challenging, and I think that's one of the things we're trying. You brought up a process question. We also take and have discussions with the Park and Community Services Commission about the projects that impact parks. So those types of things actually sometimes get 2 and 3 conversations, because they start and are vetted a little bit there. Just like this actual park pathway project that we talked about, we basically morphed 3-year plans, came back to the council and said, what do we want to do? Are you guys supportive of this? And the answer was yes.
Well, another example along the pathway in response to neighbor concerns was what we did at Veterans Memorial Park, in moving up in the timeline the repair and replacement of what turned out to be failing pathway. So we're also still reactionary when necessary on those conditions as they change. So,
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
What I would say, I always feel bad for you, Graham, because when Bob has an item, we get a full house, and tonight we've got a big crowd for you versus normal. Ed survived this so far. But I think that's part of the issue, is we have a CIP discussion. It's not that exciting. I mean, sorry. And so this is what happens. And some of these issues we've discussed over and over and in budget meetings and et cetera. I mean, these are public meetings. But if I wasn't on the council, with all due respect to Mr. Warren, I wouldn't be here either. So I think that's part of the issue. That's what our job is to get that feedback. First of all, I just want to say, I think every year for the last couple of years, we've really been improving the information we're getting, the format and the data that we're getting is very illuminating. And I remember this is maybe the 5th or 6th time that I've seen one of these on the council. I mean, the first time it was just a laundry list of everything anybody ever in this town said they wanted, and there was no realistic numbers put on there. We certainly didn't have this attachment 3 with the funding and the expenditures. So I think that this, in some ways I look at some of these deficits and go, oh my gosh, but there was blissful ignorance in the past, and that's a much worse situation to be in than going, how do we attack this? I can go through, and I'm not going to, another thing that I feel good about is I can go through most of these different buckets, shall we call them, and I feel like I can, without my own personal opinion, slash half of the deficit just by saying, you've got a low priority on that. I agree that when it really comes down to it, it's like my friend and neighbor Gary Wooten always says, there's a difference between needs and there's a difference between wants. And some of these things still are in the want category, and that's fine. So the one thing that I really did focus on as well is the streets and transportation. And I think some of these are in the wants category. But I kind of go through your medium, high, and low priority classification. And I look at some of this pavement management program and slurry seal, and those are medium. I mean, I put those almost in the required category. I mean, there are certain things that we have to do. We have to keep our roads going. We're going to have to replace trucks that the town owns, for example. I mean, these things are barely in the wants category, unless, as Steve always says, we just simply change the level of service that this town has. And let's be honest here, if we didn't have a whole bunch of hotels and we had a $1 million budget, we'd have a very different level of service, and that's the way it would be. So I really kind of focus on this streets and transportation, this $2 million deficit that I see, and I kind of go back and think, okay, within the pavement management program, the slurry seal, those things are in the high, if not required category of where, when we're looking at the budget coming down the road, you know, we've got to fund those in some way. And I'm not assuming there's any outside sales tax revenue coming our way, at least not in the budget process for sure. I think that we have to look in our general fund. We had a really good situation this last time where we could put $500,000 in capital projects. Where can we put, what kind of money do we need to put in our budget process on a yearly basis to fund the quote-unquote required items? And I think this gives us a much better tool to do that.
Just to follow on that,
Yeah.
When the payment management program was presented, you heard that by investing in the infrastructure, the streets in particular, you're not deferring that maintenance, which is going to cost you a lot more later. So it is a good investment to put money in to keep the streets well maintained. City of Napa, Napa County have essentially deferred their maintenance, and now their cost to get them back up to a good payment management index is going to be a lot more expensive than what the town of Yountville is dealing with.
Right. And I think that we're being proactive on that. I think my personal opinion is we have some funding sources in terms of our general, when I say funding sources, when I look at our budget right now for the next year, I think we have some funding that we can put specifically into that. And we're going to have to look at, I look at this wastewater and reclamation deficit, this $1.7 million. I think most of that is the financing
Recycled
piece
water
of the
project,
recycled
the
water.
financing and stuff,
So
right.
I look at that huge amount and go, you know what, we kind of have that understood of where that's going to come from.
Right.
I think we need to answer the question of what is the required piece in the streets and transportation, and we need to find ourselves an internal funding source for that. And then we've got to look, you talk about we're funded for our capital projects, but we're funded, but at the end of 5 years, if we're not putting more money in, then we're not funded for
Right.
any more time. And obviously, we're not going to do that. But I think that's the good piece of where we are.
Yeah, it's a 5-year rolling program, so every year you just move 1 year up and knock 1 year off.
And I do think that we're going to have to figure out a solution for this building. And I like that we're not just saying we've got to, do a fancy town hall and renovate everything. I just don't think that's in the cards, and nor is it appropriate at this point. And let's figure out a way. And if it's, we're going to have to do something that's a little off the normal path, I think, to make sure that this is a safe building. Otherwise, I can, we're not doing a parcel property tax on utility undergrounding. That's not going to happen. And when people say, when's it going to happen, they have never thought, when am I going to write the check for that in taxes? There's no doubt about that. So while that's nice, it's not in the need category. I wish we could do it more often. We've had to do it in a, I'm trying to think what the right word is that you always say, in a opportunistic way when something comes up. But in the future, some people talk about it, but I always tell them it's not going to happen. They don't like that. There's an election. So I don't know what else to say on that one, but this is great. So I think we've got the right path to go in there, and you heard my comments on streets.
Well, we felt it was important for the public to know where their money is being spent. I'd also get your input on, what are the priorities, if it's streets or if it's undergrounding or if it's, some other areas that we want to know earlier than later to get that into the program, bring that to you more complete when we ask you to adopt the capital improvement program. And we will be going to the Parks and Community Service Commission. We're talking to staff. I keep a list, when everybody mentions something to me on the street or in a meeting or something, then, I add those and we go through that and start to vet those and do a project description and do a budget, cost estimate, and put those into the binder, and then essentially that binder has all that information that anybody can look at. It's on our webpage, the council, anybody, it's on the counter. So it's trying to be transparent so the public can see what the plan is and how the money's being spent, and trying to explain the different pots of money and how you can't spend gas tax money on a seismic retrofit and stuff like that.
I'm going to try to avoid repeating what has already been said because I think it's been pretty effective. Two things. I have two street projects I want to comment on, but first, I do want to speak to the issue of this entire program. And on occasion, I'm sure every member of the council hears from some folks about what are we doing for our local residents. And, there's a concern about if we're seeing all these great occupancy tax levels, what is it turning into for the folks that we live right next door to? And this is an exact example of what we're reinvesting in the community. And we have the ability that is very rare these days to be very proactive and to be very responsive. We've talked about a few examples of how we've heard critical needs and we can react to that and usually, if not entirely, resolve a situation or offer a service. And sometimes our own success has been a bit of the problem, that it becomes expected and taken a little bit for granted. So I think this is a good tool for that, to remind people, what does it cost for us to continue providing this level of service? And we're telling them, and how much work we still need to do to be able to continue that level. So that's my very broad scope. Two specific projects. One, the Weber to the bike path. I didn't see it specifically called out. I don't know if it is specifically called out, but I know it's been under discussion about adding an additional access point to the bike and pedestrian path through the dead end of Weber. And is that something that we've looked to craft into the CIP, or is it in there and I didn't see it?
It's not in the capital improvement program as is written, but it's been added to the North Yountville Bike Route project. It's still in the preliminary phases. You know how you hear an act of Congress? Well, it'll be an act of the California Transportation Commission to get it approved. So we're trying to work through the Caltrans process, which is cumbersome. But if we can do that, then we would try to get that connection made between Weber and the bike path. It's also part of the countywide bike plan, so that would also help to make the argument that this is something the council wants. And sort of following on the capital improvement program, this program helps me as well when people say, well, I want to replace the curb and gutter or whatever. I say, well, it's on the list, and that helps. It also helps when the council adopts this and we say, okay, well, these are the priorities the council has set, and this is the direction that we're going. So they understand it's not going to happen tomorrow. It may not happen next year, but it's on the list for year number 3 or something like that. And that makes people feel a little bit better that there is a plan moving forward to get something done. And they understand, if it's a high, medium, or low priority. But then you may hear about it if we think it's a low priority.
Right. Oh, we do. The other thing, again, this is a very isolated, but I wanted to bring it up because it's been brought up to me several times by a couple of residents on a condition on Madison, just west of the intersection with Yount, that they're, in a couple of folks' opinion, a failing area where it dips down and causes vehicle traffic to be quite audible there. It's not like hitting a pothole, but there is an ongoing repetitive noise. And I'm wondering, just generally speaking on Madison being a major artery, what's the evaluation in terms of the quality of the road, the entire stretch through town, and is there a priority beyond the restriping to do anything in terms of the condition of the roadway, or is it considered in good enough health or good enough condition that it's not a priority?
It's one of our lowest pavement condition index streets. It's a truck route. It's beat up. The pavement's has been alligator cracked. This is one of those streets that we're probably going to have to reconstruct, and that's very expensive because you're essentially taking off all the asphalt, recompacting the base, if not replacing the base. It probably wasn't designed for the truckload that's driving on that road right now, but that's a very expensive project, $250,000 or so. So that's something we could look at in the program, but in our pavement management program, the way it's set up with the computer models, it puts it off to where it's the optimum time to replace it, where you let it deteriorate far enough and then you do the whole replacement. So it gets difficult when people say, well, why don't you just go fix the road? But you can't slurry seal it because it's too far gone, and you can't overlay it because it's too far gone, and so we just have to reconstruct it, and that's a big hit on the payment management program budget. So, but that's what we want to bring up.
Well, I'll also point out, it's one of the few streets that, along with Yountville Crossroad, that we're eligible to try to get state and regional funding for. So if we go pay for it all completely out of our general fund, they don't give us a check back. You know, so we do have it on the list, and that's something through NCTPA that we continue to try to get on a higher plateau for the regional distribution of money coming back, because that is part of the regional infrastructure.
Yeah, and that conversation, again, if that sales tax measure moves forward, then we'll be having the conversation in the future. So.
That would help. Now, one of the things we've talked about internally was do we just go and bite the bullet and go replace the pavement on Madison and then wait for other funding to come on Yount Street, which is also it's called an FAU route, a federal aid route, federal aid urban, I guess it's federal aid rural. So that would be the other alternative, is to go, spend town money there and then wait for the federal money to come through the NCTPA on Yount Street, because that also needs work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I promised, I was going to invite our public to comment if so desired. You're still good? Great. Then, do you need any additional feedback
That's
from
great.
us?
I appreciate the information and feedback.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we need to really crank through the rest of this. And we are finally, Samantha, moving on to our Parks and Recreational Department annual report.
So hopefully you took the time to look over the report, and I'm here to answer any questions or receive any comments you may have.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll move on. Questions from, or let's do questions first, if there are any specific questions of the report. Does anyone have any questions? Councilmember Moeller.
I have a question, and this was actually, you had it more detailed in last time we talked about this, but you've had almost a 50% decrease in the number of participants in the after-school program. I was just curious, did we raise the fees too much? It was just, what happened there, do you know?
I think it's a combination of things. We did raise the fees, and so we did see some families find alternate means of care. I think it's also just due to some of the economy changes. We've had quite a few families, and really when you're in a school of 160 serving 45 kids a day is pretty good ratio. Now we're down to about 27. But I think that a couple of our families experienced some job loss, which actually then they didn't need the care. So I think it's a combination of factors. And then we also had the addition of the on-school site. They're offering a homework club now, and so for some families who could save money, I think they chose to have their child go to the after-school homework club in place. Even though the hours aren't as long, it made it a little easier for them. So we've seen a decline in full-time kids, and some of those full-time kids are now just drop-in kids, and then we've seen some totally go away, unfortunately.
Specific questions, and then we can entertain comments. Vice Mayor, question?
I just have a couple comments.
No other questions? So then general comments about the report. Councilmember Hall?
Yeah, I first of all want to thank you for the report. I think the way it's laid out actually made it a little easier to go through. I'm not big on color, being a numbers person, so black and white works for me. But I will say that, laying out the goal or the mission of each sort of department or respective department, and then doing that explanation of the objectives and what was accomplished, and then putting a little bit of what I would call the box score metrics to each of the departments really gives it drives the story home. And I would just say that the programs that we provide here in the community, we all know are cherished by most, used by few, and really, really enjoyed by all of us that have or want to participate in something and just can't seem to find the free time to do it. So, I want to thank again you for pulling this together the way it is, because it does really, and I'm assuming, because I saw it online, everyone has access to this report online. It really is a really comprehensive summary of what's happened. So I just wanted to commend you on it, because it lays it out very clearly for what's happened. And to the point of ASP, it's a challenge, and there's a lot that's going on in our communities with keeping kids busy, and keeping them busy keeps them out of trouble. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in the meeting tonight. But this is a great program that families should hopefully be taking advantage of, and I only hope that everyone recognizes what an opportunity is to have such a service in this community with all the rest of the Parks and Rec stuff. That's all I have.
Councilmember Moeller, any comments?
No, I also think this is a very comprehensive, the first time we've really seen something like this, and so I think it really helps. The only thing that be nice if we could get a little more information was how valued is each one of these things that we offer by the community. I guess one way you could really look at it by the number of participants, but I think there's an inherent value that would be great to really assess, because in the event we ever have to make any changes, if people really love the sports, it'd be great if we could somehow capture that information. But overall, I think it's really a great step in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to mention we are going to be rolling out a community-wide needs assessment. So you'll start seeing that pop up in our newsletter and then our brochure guide and online. And so over the next few months, we hope to capture that data that you're mentioning. Yeah.
Councilmember Dornbecker.
Well, I just want to commend you on the how clear it is, and I, for one, think that all of the programs are very valuable for the community, but I understand wanting to find out what the community members most want and most need, but the economic factors and I'm not surprised at some of the changes, but nonetheless, it still looks like it's trending upward to me.
Yeah,
Well
we're
done.
definitely seeing more use. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Well, first of all, I think made a comment on the CIP about people asking where does all the money go and how does it benefit local residents. This is a perfect example of things that really only benefit local residents on balance. I grew up in a rural county in Kentucky, and we didn't have any of this stuff. I mean, I don't think they had a department that would even deal with this kind of stuff. So this is in the want category, but it sure is nice to have. And I think we're very fortunate in Yountville, in such a small town with 3,000 residents, to be able to have this much offered. I think at the late hour last meeting, you probably got off a little bit easy on the budget discussion, because some of the budget items were off in your department, but the overall revenue was up so much that it's like, not a big deal. But I think that I know you guys are looking at some of those issues, and obviously after school, both of my kids are in after school program and do a lot in the summer program, are both real to me. I think it's great that we have programs that look at kids, that look at teens, that look at everybody in the community, that are aimed towards seniors. We get that breadth of programs, and nothing is going to apply to every single person in town, and we're kind of covering our bases. I do think with after school, we need to not only look at what's happened, but how can we, if we've got a school of 150 kids, not only what is it that people want that we have, they're in the program, but I cannot for the life of me figure out what everybody else does with their kids after school. I mean, people have jobs. So how do we get those people in? We have talked about in the past the summer program. What do we do in Yountville that makes our summer program something that people want to come to? I mean, there's other summer camps around, and what can we offer, and what can we get the community in that would be great if we had food week or something up here with some of the chefs. I don't know what it would be, but something that we can bring people up and pump some of these numbers up to make them a little more break even. Hopefully we can continue down that path. Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully the weather stays warm for the pool this year. So
That would be great.
we'll find out. Thank you.
Well, and I'll just continue for a moment on the after-school program that's been brought up. It's going to be an interesting dynamic this year with the changes at the elementary school adding a sixth grade, and what that means in terms of the number of students and also what it does to the lack of space. So I know there are going to be some challenges this coming year for the next at least 12 months or beyond And so we'll be paying attention, of course, how you find those great solutions.
We're gearing up for that now. I mean, we're going to be piloting a different program this summer to try to capture those 5th and 6th graders, and are looking at ways of kind of dividing the after-school program. And in a way, we can better serve those groups too, because your 5th or 6th grader in the same space with your K or 1st grader is an interesting dynamic too, and difficult at times for staff to manage. So we're already gearing up for that.
And the only other thing I wanted to highlight on page 8, where you're talking about the community center rental use totals, and we gave you what was a fairly challenging, if not close to impossible task, which was get better cost recovery while giving local residents and local nonprofits breaks.
Yes.
And so, again, it's helpful to see how many different organizations are partnering with the town, getting zero cost or low cost access to the community center to do their business. And so it's just a reminder again of how we're able to manage our programming so that we're maximizing what we can offer our immediate residents as well as the extended family throughout the county. So thank you for, again, being flexible and dynamic about making, I think there was a comment made about evaluating what's working and what's not working and making those adjustments as necessary. So
Thank you.
we'll still be asking you for greater cost recovery.
I know. That's the goal.
Yeah. Would the public like to comment on this? No? Great. Well, then I think that does it for the department annual report for Park and Recreation. We're going to move on to council
Mayor
member.
Dunbar?
I'm sorry?
I had one more thing.
Oh,
if-
one more
if-
staff
under
report?
reports.
You haven't had enough of the
I
microphone
know.
tonight, Grant?
I only touched on park paths. I just want to let people know that the contractors finished the concrete work at Vineyard Park, so now they'll be moving to Veterans Memorial Park. So beware of construction and signage and stuff that they'll be doing one half of the park instead of taking out the paths, and then people still use the other side of the park, and then they'll switch over and put people on the new park paths and then take out the old paths. So just want people to be aware and be safe.
And the expectation about the sidewalk at Bouchon Bakery is at the end of this week, is the anticipation?
They're hoping to open this week.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
They should finish pouring tomorrow.
And Ad hoc, I believe, is supposed to be coming online about the same time.
Mhm.
So
This month.
it'll be nice to see some of those fences coming down.
I just want to also add to that Jacob is working, or Jake's, we're going to start working on reconstructing the bench area that I know a lot of those local residents use. And we're looking at purchasing benches, and I'll have one on that a local member of the community is going to be dedicating and purchasing as well. So that'll follow.
Well, I have a question about that, and one of those benches, at least one of them, I thought maybe two, were memorial benches. Are they coming back the same way?
The one bench, it appears it was a memorial bench, but the plaque is actually mounted on the ground on some concrete. So we can't find any documentation, but we did speak to a neighbor. But what we're going to do is replace that dedication on one of the new benches so that it still remains a dedicated space to that individual, but not leave it in the same way it was. It will improve the look of it. And that's part of actually the program that you all approved. So we're just really applying those guidelines that the town is able to replace it if needed within 10 years.
Okay. Let's move on to council meeting reports. I'm going to start with one that's actually not listed. Councilmember Hall attended the Napa County Gang and Youth Violence Commission.
Yeah, that was, it was the first, well, I guess the second meeting of this commission. The first time Yountville had a representative, so the meetings are quarterly. The first one was in November, and then this one. It was interesting. It was, there were a lot of participants. I would say there was probably 25 individual commissioners, so one from each municipality, sheriffs, police department heads, people from the community, a youth representative. There's going to be a faith leader represented in the commission. It's interesting because Napa County doesn't have a huge quote unquote gang issue per se. It's a very quiet issue, if you will. I'm learning a little bit about this, or I guess I should say a lot about this. But with young kids, you want to be aware of things. I guess what I would say in general with regards to Yountville, and It wasn't that people scoffed necessarily when they said the representative from Yountville, because I think our gang issues here are less prevalent than they may be in some of the other municipalities. But what I would say is that we do have and this is what I told the commission, we have a linked interest and a vested interest in ensuring that gang and youth violence is managed, or at least understood and vetted throughout the county, because so many of our young people go from here to those schools throughout the rest of the district. In addition to that, because, as it was made apparent, our streets are paved with gold, we have a maybe more affluent area where some of the activity that those types of groups might want to focus their interest could potentially be here in Yountville. And so obviously, with a high population of tourists who are carrying around buckets of money or cameras or whatever, they become likely targets. And so gang and youth violence certainly can play a part. I would say the one part that I felt like I could actually lend some credibility to the overall commission, or at least my presence as being a credible person, is really relating what our Parks and Recreation Department does have and provide for our residents in this community, because youth that are active in programs after school or otherwise are not as inclined to go out and be involved in these types of activities that gangs typically get involved with. So it was really very humbling to think about that with respect to our other communities around the valley, and to think how lucky we are to have such a safe community, number one, but one that also focuses so much attention and effort on giving our youth or young people an opportunity to go out and spend time doing these activities, and not out there looking for trouble, or basically being, loitering, having the opportunity to get into trouble. And so I talked about YTX and those kinds of programs, and just really, how lucky we are here in this valley. I would also mention, just as one last item with regards to that, and then I'll finish, because it was a long meeting. It was a marathon meeting, the second one they had. It hopefully portends that the next several meetings will be much shorter. But I would say that, gang violence is not something we see a lot of in Napa Valley or in the community, the county as a whole. But youth violence is very prevalent, and it's more prevalent maybe in the manner that we all understand it as bullying, which is becoming a nationwide issue. And so I brought that up as something that, I thought the commission should at least evaluate, because, that happens probably from preschool on, but you certainly see it and hear about it even in our small community. But anyways, it was nice to be participatory on it, and it also gave me an opportunity to interact with some other people throughout the county. So I thought it was a good experience, and hopefully it'll be one that we'll be active in.
Good.
Certainly we will be.
Not too active.
Well, hopefully not long and active.
Thank you. I will just very cursory report on the flood control and water conservation district. The vast majority of time is spent getting status reports and updates, PowerPoints on the status of the flood project down in Napa. There is a concern about the lack of federal funding that is not coming in this year. They're hoping to get a more substantial pot of money. So there's outreach by Napa Mayor Tekel and Supervisor Dodd are going back to Washington yet again to do some more lobbying to try to see if any money can be freed up, especially in response. I saw the news coverage about the barge system south to San Jose from San Francisco received more than they were even expecting or almost asking for. So we don't know if there's any wiggle room in Washington. But I'll jump to the Napa County Transportation and Planning Agency. And then if you have any details that I miss, Vice Mayor, but there is expected to be a decision at our next meeting, March 21st, regarding the board's decision to pursue a sales tax measure in November, to put that on the ballot, a countywide measure. There is talk of at least one, if not more, local cities doing their own sales tax measure, and so that's being evaluated before our next meeting. Also, the future of the County Arts Commission is going to come to a head, and the recommendation from the NCTPA will then be sent on to the Board of Supervisors for potential final action. There was also discussion about the fare box system. There was a staff proposal to hire a consultant, but the board decided that it was premature to do that at this time, and further evaluation of the antiquated fare box system is ongoing. Also, the public review period was opened for the countywide bicycle plan. We received a presentation just last meeting on that plan, but there is a public review period that's now open. Are there any other details that you remember from that meeting?
That's what I had. Can I follow up on that for a second?
Sure. Vice Mayor.
Steve. The next NCTPA meeting, which the mayor pointed out, is the 21st of March. At the last meeting, the draft plan or the draft ballot measure was sent to the different jurisdictions for, let's call it, comment. And I think the intention was to have the different boards and councils to take a look at that and kind of get a feel. Are we going to agendize that, or is the plan to do that on the 20th, which is the day before the next meeting?
We can if you'd like. The Public Works Director and I have been active with the various TAC and city manager groups providing comment, have reviewed it, and generally, with the one big exception of the distribution allocation, have proceeded and commented on the variations and find it acceptable. So if that's something that the council would like on the 20th, we can do that.
Well, because the formula is left with
That's why
spaces
we
with
haven't
the formula
brought it.
now, that is a big blank so far.
Well, I guess maybe my suggestion or my request would be is that we do agendize that on the 20th, because we've talked about this
We can do that.
on the side, and I think that, here's my concern, is depending on what the thought of this council is, and as you pointed out at the last NCTA meeting, I mean, nobody's really taken a firm stand of, hey, yeah, I want to do this. Everybody's kind of talking around it. I think that the representatives, the mayor and myself, need to have probably a pretty good feel of what the general sense of this council is as a whole before we start to talk about, as you pointed out, spending $200,000 of NCPA money to just even put it on the ballot. Forget about winning or losing. I think that would be very useful.
I agree, and I would support putting that on the agenda. What I would also like specifically about that report is not only our threshold for the formula about cost recovery, but also what we would consider if any one individual municipality were to choose to go on their own. There is a very real possibility. St. Helena has broached that issue specifically. They haven't made that decision, but what we would want to do as a council representing Yountville is, do we still support a countywide measure? The St. Helena concept would not directly compete with. It would not be an additional local tax, but it could be confused to be that in the public's perception. So we just need to have that conversation about if any individual cities back out of that county effort, does that change our perspective? So that just part of the discussion for the 20th.
We'll put together a few questions and thoughts for you, and hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what the proposed distribution model is.
Great. Thank you very much. Was that it
That's
for?
it on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it for my meeting reports. I do have a couple announcements I was going to make. I'll just go ahead and do those, and then I'll offer any others. I wanted to remind folks about the upcoming Red and White Affair, which is a benefit for Yountville Elementary School, which is March 10th. I want to bring that up now because we did approve this evening the cancellation of our March 6th meeting, so that you'll probably see some notice of that out and about town. It's at Silverado Vineyards, again, March 10th. I believe tickets are available at the school, and
There's an online site for that. I think it's called biddingforgood.com/Yountville Elementary. And I am going off memory a little bit, but I mean, there's a lot of posters around town that you can see. We have at the deli, the market. I know they have the chamber that has all the information. So you can certainly get, I bought mine online.
And I believe the community bulletin board, town hall and
Town halls,
the bulletin
they're
board by the post office. I
everywhere.
believe.
Very colorful.
The other thing, just a reminder, in case folks weren't listening earlier tonight, the Yountville Arts Committee Photographic Society exhibition this weekend, Friday evening, Saturday, most of the day, and then Sunday afternoon. So please stop by and check out some great photography at the Community Center Gallery. Any other announcements, comments? Councilmember Mueller?
Also, tomorrow, I think Councilmember Dornbecker will be there. It's going to be a really exciting meeting that no one really wants in town to miss at the library. And it's going to be from 1:30 to 4:30, and it's going to be the big launch of us getting volunteers to now start keeping the library open. So everybody, come out and see what it's all about and ask questions, and it'll be really great for us to begin the road to keeping our library open a lot more hours.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And we rely heavily on our wonderful volunteer spirit here in town, so hopefully people will be able to step up. And we've heard certainly for a long time that this is what we want, so people need to help step up and make it happen. Any other comments, announcements?
I just have one brief one that I, this past week, attended the Women Veterans monthly meeting, and it was really just an informational meeting, but I was happy to meet with the ladies there and get to know them. I want to sort of go to a few more before I report on what their issues are, but it was a good meeting.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to future agenda items and just reading the expectation of the Heston Vineyards Master Development Plan coming back, and budget workshop on 2012-13 revenue projections. Then I think that's going to be it for our business tonight. Do we have reason for closed session or
Yes,
time
you
for
do.
closed session?
Yes,
Okay.
I would ask your concurrence that you extend for 15 minutes in the case we do have two closed session items. One is a status report on litigation, and the second is our continuation of the closed session we didn't have last time with regards to preparation for labor negotiations with the two bargaining units with the town.
So is there a motion to extend the meeting to, let's say 10:30, and hope it's less than that?
10:15.
I'm going to ask for 10:30.
I move that we extend the meeting until 10:30.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So I know how these things can go. If we get out early, that's great. So I'm